Okay, I'm live. I'm just going to give a few minutes here for everyone to get their notifications and start to trickle into the stream. Thanks for the bunch of you I see. There's already a few already out there waiting. Really appreciate you folks starting into this one really early. And once again, I'm going to be having it's kind of an informal debate. As you know, I'm not a fan of the whole debate style where you give someone like a certain amount of minutes and then you cut them off. Not a fan of that in any manner, but or by any stretch. So what I like to do, as you folks know, is just kind of have like you would do, if two people were sitting around a pub or anywhere and just having a conversation, whether it's an argument or discussion or debate, basically just exchanging dialogue and obviously, discussing what are the principles, what are the bases, what are the underlying fundamentals, why, like, where do your thought processes come from? And that's the kind of way that I like to do things, which is why I typically do them. And of course, in a live stream, right? So I don't want to I don't want to edit. I don't want to, to play these games or anyone to accuse me that, things were taken out of context when it's done live in real time, right? And it gives us both the opportunity, to press on each other on the exchanges and maybe to ask further follow-up questions in real time, right? This is the best way as far as I'm concerned, other than being in the same physical space. I think actually being in the same physical space is probably the best way, but the second best way to have these kinds of discussions or informal debates is when you have full audio and visual capabilities. So anyways, folks, I'm just going to bring, I noticed that Chris is actually here already waiting to get brought on. So I'm going to bring him on, let him introduce himself, and we'll just kind of go from there. So just give me 1 sec there, folks. Good day, Chris. How you doing?
How you doing?
Doing really well. So the audio, the videos, everything good for you on your end, I would assume, yeah?
Yeah, it's working fine. I have been having some allergy issues, but that's about it. So, yep.
Okay, excellent. All right. So anyway, so just before I brought you on, I was just mentioning to the audience there's a few people here already. Anyways, just to let them know, although some of the typical people that watch me on a regular basis are quite familiar with how I do things, and I even kind of let you know. Well, even before going live, you probably can acknowledge that, I didn't do any setup, right? And I don't care about doing setups and telling you how you have to deal with your end. Basically, I'm just going to talk to you as another human being, which we are, right? And then we're just going to kind of exchange our ideas, our thoughts, or our opinions or perspectives, and just kind of go from there. Like I say, it's very informal. I don't believe, I don't care for the kind of setup where you cut someone off because they've gone 30 seconds over, their allotted time limit. I like for people to have the ability and the time to fully bring out their nuanced views. So as this, well, I guess initially, first and foremost, the overarching emphasis of this informal debate is, as far as I'm concerned, is mass immigration. But the first thing that kind of got us along this conversation, or the thing that started us on this conversation, was a post that I had put. Actually, let me just bring that up, actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, I might as well just bring that right up. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so that give the people at least a bit of an idea of what we're where our basis, where our starting point was. So I had shared. Yeah, that's up on the screen. Okay, so basically, I had shared a meme by a user profile that goes by the name of Tara Bull, and it's basically the Riddler. It's a meme, as per usual. That's how a lot of conversations take place, or that's the basis for a lot of conversation these days, is through a meme. And the meme is, riddle me this: how do immigrants strengthen our country but not their own? And so I put, anyone want to answer this question? And of course, that's when you followed up subsequently. Now, of course, I will say first and foremost, as a libertarian, I will just say I'm not against immigration, but the problem is we're dealing with a state, and the state is who's picking who gets to immigrate and who doesn't. If it was just, natural immigration, or we were living even in a time prior to the welfare state, then as a libertarian, to be, philosophically not just astute, but honest and intellectually and ethically, who is it my business to tell where people should live on this big giant blue dot that we call the planet Earth. That's not not something that I actually would really normally care about. The problem is, though, is we have to deal with the real world, and I actually have this kind of dialogue with other libertarians as well. And I'm right there with the ideal, like the ideal situation, right? Even the proponents of open borders, under certain ideal situations or circumstances, all for it. But once again, we have to live in the actual real world that we live in, and that's kind of the baseline from my standpoint in terms of mass immigration, and this mass immigration is basically a government program. Anyway, so your follow up to that was more or less they were able to do things here that they weren't able to do in their country. Immigrants open restaurants, which of course, I mean, who's against? I mean, take it from someone like myself who really, really loves an international type of cuisine and grew up for a large portion of my life in the east end of Toronto, which was, when you talk about multicultural in terms of restaurants or just the different types of cultures that you can experience in such a like in just a matter of one day, you can go through Little Italy, China, you can go Little Greece, you can go all through places and great restaurants. Well, of course, I'm not against restaurants in any way, shape, or form. But of course, my thing. Well, actually, I shouldn't go on too long. I should actually before I even continue on, let me just give you a chance to kind of, at least first and foremost, kind of introduce yourself, and then maybe just if you want to follow up on this first initial reaction, and we'll kind of go from there. How's that?
Yes, I'm Chris Baker. My podcast is Fountainhead Forum. Uh, I've been doing this, a little over a year and a half now, and I don't know, I don't know of any other English-speaking podcaster who has covered Javier Milei more than I have. Out of my 162 shows, I have 38.
Excellent.
And I could also point out that there were a lot of Venezuelan immigrants who went to Argentina who helped Milei's campaign.
For sure. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. So is that what I was more or less suggesting? Did you want to introduce yourself in any way or like,
yes,
because I
I'm
understand.
Chris Baker. I live in Austin, Texas currently, although I'm thinking about going elsewhere. I'm on Central Time, I think, so I'm an hour different from you. I was born and raised in Moundsville, West Virginia, which is where this background is from.
Excellent.
So my hometown. Yes, it's a burial mound. I've worked at Liberty Magazine. I've been to lots of different events, starting at the Foundation for Economic Education back in 1994. I now realize that I'm probably the last of the libertarians who got most of his libertarian education from book catalogs and not the internet.
Right on.
Book catalogs in the mail, they were very important. I've certainly known some good Canadians too. I hope you guys can work it out up there. It's a lot of beautiful things about Canada,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, actually, to tell you the
Jamie
truth,
Soleil on our shows. That's one of my holy grails,
Yeah. Well, I'm really appreciative of some of your admiration for Canadians, and I will say there's some definite aspects of the culture, at least the historical culture of this country, that was very conducive, and I guess that's probably why, even though very early on, obviously with the whole the war and the British and the fact that Canada more or less took the side the British, but I mean I would say other than that, once those types of growing pains seem to subside to a substantial degree, I would say at least within the last 100 years or so is what has made Canada so much more conducive to being a great place is the fact that we're very close, have very close relationship. And fortunately, I would suggest as a Canadian have adopted some of or at least some of us have adopted some of that, entrepreneurial mindset and that very almost rebellious and auspicious kind of mentality that is something that is very gripping on the American psyche. It's something that as a Canadian who actually I used to drive long haul and I hauled down to the US predominantly as a Canadian truck driver. You're in the US actually way more than you are ever in your own country when you drive long haul because of the vastness of our trades. But I will just say that I was always very envious of the fact that I could always point out there was always some things as a Canadian I could come home and say, it was one of the strange things actually was the debit card. You say at the time we were quite advanced in terms of having these debit cards very early on in the early aughts. And it seemed like there was some states in particular that maybe were a little bit further behind. But in most areas and aspects, what I found that was the striking difference, lots of similarities, of course, because a lot of our history and heritage would have been similar based on the kind of actual immigration that would have taken place even back in the day. But the one thing that I've always noticed and kind of been very envious of in terms of not just the American culture stuff, it's the Americans' willingness, and that's the one thing that we're seeing obviously breaking down now to a sizable degree. But whether they're, to me, left or right in terms of America, because it was more capitalist and especially in originally intended as a free market type of system, is the only color that, as far as I was concerned, that actually used to matter was green. And something that actually created obviously a very entrepreneurial mindset for a lot of American people. And that's why a lot of my fellow Canadians, I know of actual real Canadians that have tried or strive to achieve or attain some amount of success in our country and have great talents. But unfortunately, the ones that do seemingly ultimately end up achieving or get to that upper echelon of success are the ones that have had to move down to your country, because your culture seems much more conducive with supporting each other in their endeavors, particularly in the economic realm, of course. And whereas in Canada, we have this thing, and it's not just here in Canada, Australia is kind of known for it too, is more or less like, have you ever heard of the tall poppy syndrome?
I think I know what you mean. The tall poppy gets cut first.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's a strange and strange even as an adult. When you're younger, you just try to figure this stuff out. But as an adult, it's kind of soul crushing to know that you're surrounded by so many people who, if you do strive to attain or separate yourself from the collective in any way, especially if they perceive it as achieving or attaining success, it's very dominant, like I say, in the culture, that they seemingly just want to beat you back or beat you back down. I guess that's that whole seemingly race to the lowest common denominator thing, which is I imagine why socialism, the acceptance of it, was much more susceptible in this country than it is in yours. But
I still find it interesting though, because your country still really has a frontier. I mean, if I really want to get lost, I can go get lost in Canada. I mean, I can't really, unless I do that in Alaska, I can't really do that in the US anymore. It's there's still, and one thing you said about success in America, I always love to say, maybe it's because I'm an aficionado, but we Americans love those Canadian game show hosts. Alex Trebek, Jim Perry, and Monty Hall, for example.
Right.
They all came down here and hosted game shows. And if I wanted to go host a game show in Canada, I'd have to have a Canadian co-host.
Yeah. Well, it's not even just those. Like, even if you think of there for quite a while, anyway, it seemed like there for a substantial portion, not just in movies, but in music and television, a lot of Canadians were punching way above their weight and overly represented on the big screens as such. But once again, that achievement, that attainment of their success, it really required them to be part and parcel of the American system in order for them to do it. I mean, you think of even for a little while there, the biggest comedians on the planet at a specific timeline was your Mike Myers and your Jim Carreys. It seemed like they were just nonstop, just smashing box office hits, and those are obviously two Canadians as well. And then you have your Celine Dion's, your Shania Twain's, all kinds of like a talent for sure. Yeah. But once again, I'm sure if they've probably even written their own autobiographies or such. And I'm sure if you read them in there, there'd be something where the reason why they went to America was because they felt they could not achieve that kind of success in their own country.
Well, we have 10 times the population. I mean, you can sell a lot more records here. I mean, it only makes sense that they'd want to try to make it in America. But, also, I also like to think, about the second city, which started in Toronto. You gave us all those great comedians to come out of there, like John Candy and some other really, in some cases, Americans went up to Toronto to hone their craft and came back to America and made it big. It was very,
Yeah.
a very interesting crossover. And, and of course, I can't think of Canadian music without thinking of Gordon Lightfoot.
Yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
my dad loved Gordon Lightfoot, and I loved him too. We lost him last year, and I just
Right on. Well, actually, the more you mention that, the more I think about it, it kind of makes sense that actually, the Canadians who do ultimately achieve and attain that success, when you do function in a society that is maybe more conducive with more of collectivism or socialism, then I guess, yeah, for you to achieve or to reach those upper limits or echelons of success, then you do have to be someone that's got a lot within you to want to separate you from the chaff, right? So I guess
yeah.
there is a little bit something to that. I definitely believe that for sure.
And I
But
mean,
anyway,
really,
yeah,
there are only
sorry, go ahead.
15 cities you can tour in Canada. I mean, you can come to
Yeah,
America and tour about 60 different cities. I mean,
right.
there's just money there's more money to be made here because we got more people.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
I think it's great. I mean, I know there are some artists that are big in Canada, but not big in the US, but it's and I don't really know why that is. There's there's some musical people that are big in Britain, but aren't big in the US. Why that is, I don't know either. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, anyways, regardless of that, like I say, the main focus, obviously, of this, I guess we'll call it an informal debate, is the simple fact, and I would imagine because the label that you have, the Fountainhead, then I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you come from the objectivist camp, like Ayn
I
Rand.
have a lot. I certainly am sympathetic to Rand. I have a lot of
Right.
different influences. I
Yeah.
wanted to call my show a forum, so I thought that was just a great name with the alliteration.
Right.
I've had some people, I've had some people that are high up in the objectivist movement, but I've had some libertarians, and I've had a lot of people around the world on too. I always
Right.
like to mention the guy from the Ayn Rand Center, Armenia, because
Right.
that guy always manages to get more women than men at his events, and I don't know what he's doing in Armenia, but we got to figure out what he's doing over there.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on. Well, actually,
I'm pretty international in my focus.
well, that's awesome. Well, like the big thing for me, anyways, which I find striking, but at the same time a little bit difficult pill to swallow, is the only people I seem to be able to find that will engage in these kinds of conversations or dialogues or debate is, now you would be like, I guarantee once again we can definitely find areas of disagreement, but it seemingly almost always ends up being someone that either identifies as libertarian, an anarchist, a voluntarist, objectivist, classical liberal. That's another one. But this is the part that I'm finding that's most disturbing. I'm very much appreciative of having these kinds of conversations, but it would be really nice if at some point in time, people that want to identify in some other, with some other identifier, right? So progressive or modern liberal or modern conservative or neoliberal, neoconservative. It'd be nice if some of these people would show the same kind of audacity and courage of their conviction to actually be willing to engage in the battle of ideas, or even just in an informal debate such as this. Because as much as it'll be I'm sure there will be a lot of fruit that will come bear from this conversation, and there'll be some things that people will be able to take away from it. At the end of the day, the objectivists or the other libertarians, even though we definitely have some minor disagreements, is not my major concern, right? And I would imagine you don't stay up all night or every night worrying about that libertarians are going to come after you in any way, right? So this is obviously a major issue. Is we're the ones that are willing to engage in these kinds of discussions, but the ones that are truly the gravest threat to us all are completely unwilling to engage. They just want to use the might of the state to impose their ideas and be damned to having any dialogue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need dialogues, it's and I think conversations like this, although sometimes people say that libertarians are more interested in debating each other than actually getting anything done.
Yeah.
So that can be an issue.
Yeah.
I asked, Mo, I've talked to Mo and he said you're a good guy. I didn't really know who you were, so I just figured, we'll go in and see what happens. It's
Oh, right on. Yeah,
it's
Tim's
live though. I made sure it was live so it couldn't be edited, although I do most of my shows taped, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's I actually prefer doing it live because, like you say,
oh yeah,
it's a way for me to guarantee, at least to the person on the other side, that there's not going to be any shenanigans. And if anyone has ever watched my live streams, I don't even try to play the gotcha moments. Like, to me, it's it's not to me, it's not a popularity contest. It's not a matter of, although once again, I will admit as a libertarian, very much I do have that competitive mindset, but I'm constantly aware that I have that competitive mindset. So I'm always trying to tamper it down, at least when it comes to something, because to me, I think just like an objectivist mindset is, I do these things for not necessarily just benevolence, although that's a natural extension of that, but predominantly for selfish reasons. I want the world to be good. I want the people around me to be decent. I want, everyone to treat each other at least rather reasonable. And because that benefits me, it benefits my family, it benefits my children, and it benefits society at large, which I've got to live in. So to me, whether people want to do these things for, economic reasons or benevolent reasons, or even if there's some selfish reasons for it, if the end goal, if the point of your discussion is to at least get to the point where we can actually discuss, hammer out these ideas, or what is, more prudent in terms of having a genuinely prosperous and fruitful and, peaceful society, then I'm more than willing to engage. And that, to me, at the end of the day, is I look at it, these kinds of conversations, as an investment. This is an investment in not just my future, but your future and the future of my children and others. Because just like people in the past who sacrificed and did a lot of great things in order to, take us out of the swamps or out of the caves and put us on better footing or in better mindsets or having more peaceful and prosperous societies. I think the onus is on us, once again, not just sheerly out of benevolence, but for the reason of maintaining that. You got to think of all the work. I'm also the kind of person, because I have that kind of entrepreneurial and engineer type of mindset, I understand how much work it goes into even producing just one car. I mean, just think about Milton Friedman's The I, Pencil movie, even what it takes just to
That's
build
Leonard Reed, not Milton Friedman.
Oh, sorry, Leonard Reed. Yeah.
Yeah.
But even just what it goes into just to make one pencil. And when I think about extrapolate that kind of thing out to even just the modern Western, supposedly free societies that we live in, or at least the remnants of what it's to me, it's the same kind of mindset of whether you're talking about a car or a pencil or society. Is, yes, I think everyone should at least try to contribute in some way to maintain, or actually, I think, as far as I'm concerned, to not just maintain, but actually increase the kind of understanding in terms of what it is to be a free human being living on this big blue dot. And that is what the point of my conversation with you today, and every conversation that I engage in, is to do. So without further ado, let me just ask you first and foremost, real quick, because I would assume that you agree with the NAP, which is obviously a core tenet of the philosophy of liberty.
Yeah, I agree with the non-aggression principle. I mean, yes.
Okay. So then I think what it really will come down to, this argument, and we'll get through it, this debate, is I think it's mostly going to be based on semantics or maybe a misunderstanding of each other's position. So how about we just start right there with trying to clarify things. So in terms of with the whole restaurant, or actually, let me just go by my original post, or the original post that I had reshared. So in terms of like, how do immigrants straighten their country but not their own? So I would just ask, I'm just going to ask you right now, what did you think the intention was of me in terms of sharing that, and why did you feel that you had to reply?
You seem to think that immigrants don't add any value, is what that was what I got from that. And
Right.
immigrants can add value. Also I would look to American Nikola Tesla. I mean, even Ayn Rand was our own immigrant. Ludwig von Mises, it's a.
Yeah. So then that's great. I'm glad you brought that up, because then that's a point of clarification I want to make. So that is not the case by any stretch. And I guess that's one area where it really helps if we've been following each other. But like you were saying, You don't know much of my past. So
there's a lot of times where we spin other people's things and we respond to how we spin them, not what they actually mean. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, because me, as like I say, as a libertarian, or even as a father, as just me as a human being, is I extrapolate from any of the principles that I hold near and dear, And what I do is I just try to be as consistent in the application of those. And once again, this is the area where I've had disagreements with libertarians as well in terms of the open/closed border. And I even actually early on, so I first started learning about libertarianism predominantly 2008, 2012, the whole Ron Paul movement and his run for president in the United States. And the man just with the kind of things he said just inspired me to the point where I just got to learn more about this stuff. And it was amazing. And I thought, it's a beautiful basis for that. And I started out early on. And when I heard the talk about, from some open border libertarians saying, the government shouldn't get to pick and choose, where you get to live on the, and I had initially agreed, which that makes complete sense. But then I had other libertarians, who obviously I believe actually they thought more critically, or they took more time to bounce those ideas off their head and have their preconceived notions or premises challenged, because I think they made the much better case, which is why I've kind of firmly stood. And I don't mind, like I say, I've changed my mindset because I'm willing to allow my preconceived notions or things to be challenged in that way. But I think the ones that, and I'm not saying closed border entirely, that nobody, the problem is though, is how do you get out from under the fact, or how do you try to deny the fact that we live under the state, the apparatus of the state, and which is now completely distributionist in its iteration. So the state, prior to the welfare state, then I would have a person like myself, if I was being much more consistent in the principle, I'd be much more apt to say, yeah, who is it, to me or anyone else to tell how where another person should live. And I still, like I say, would love or prefer that I should have no say, right, where another person chooses to live. The problem is we live in not just a welfare state, but much beyond even just the redistribution aspect of the welfare state, to the point now where, like, I'm more familiar with Canada than the US, but I'm sure in the US it's based in the same way, and actually even in terms of numbers at a higher degree. But in Canada, just one simple example. So whether they're asylum seekers or even migrants, a lot of the people that are coming to this country, and I'm not blaming the people. That's the other thing I'll say first and foremost. Well, not all of them, because if you just want to come here because you want to better your lot, then I'm all for it. But when the government themselves is creating a program where they'll bring people to this country, and this is real, this is something that happens real. There's legislation on the books and bills and policies where they'll bring someone to this country that's, from a foreign area, never lived here before, and give them free healthcare, free dental, free prescription drugs, 20 years of all the, and we're talking the kind of healthcare that, like in Canada, we have a socialized healthcare system, but it's for baseline kind of stuff. If you want the good stuff, you got to pay for things like Blue Cross or Blue Shield. But the asylum seekers or migrants can come here and get 4 years of free housing, 20 years of the upper kinds of healthcare. Now, that to me, that sets up a really, 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 really bad scenario when you're forcing people that are here already. Well, first of all, I'm against any kind of forced wealth and income redistribution. So I'm against socialized healthcare from the get-go. And it's already difficult enough that I or anyone else has to be forced to pay for other people's bad decisions, because healthcare is not just when someone's had a heart attack and they desperately need medical attention. Healthcare, if you've ever been to the doctor's office, especially here in Canada, you'll see it's a lot of hypochondriacs, it seems. And I guess that happens when you have the pretense of free healthcare. But once again, it's bad enough that I have to be forced to subsidize and pay for people who want to use this free system, to the point where it's, one of the largest line item parts of a budget in the entire country. But now I have to be consistent in the fact, if I'm against that for even people that are already here, that I'm forced to pay for them, well, then I have to be, if I'm going to be consistent in my principles, I have to be even more so against it for people that haven't at least even been here long enough to put some skin in the game. Like that to me seems like a very, very, very highly unfair situation or scenario to place any citizen in. Oh, you still there?
I think we should focus on fighting these giveaways instead of fighting immigrants.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, continue on.
I
Continue your
mean,
thought here.
and I mean, yeah, it seems as though the energy is being misdirected. Let's fight the welfare state instead of fighting immigrants, because there are lots of immigrants who don't want to who don't want to live off the welfare state. I met a guy in Peru back in 2017, and a few years later, his father died in the state of New York, and he wanted to bring his Peruvian girlfriend to the funeral, and they wouldn't let her in. She couldn't go to just to go to see her boyfriend's funeral, her boyfriend's dad's funeral, and she couldn't come to America for 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
what's the point? What's the point of barring that person from going to a funeral?
Well, that's the thing, right? But this is the point: is that's the state. Now, I will just say, I don't think you were actually intentionally accusing me of it, but once again, you'll never find anything on the internet, and trust me, there's literally tens of thousands of not just bits of information, little mini articles or write-ups or things I've done, but I mean videos, thousands of them, live stream, where I've ever said that we should, and you'll never hear of an immigrant that'll ever accuse me of ever targeting them in any way. Because once again, I'm not about that. I'm just saying, and as much as that story, and I get that these single stories are the ones that appeal to people's emotions the best. Good on you for doing that. I understand the reason for doing so. But once again, let's use that same scenario, right? And I get it, the bleeding heart, compassion. And, I'll tell you the truth, I am a compassionate person to a substantial degree for people that are worthy or deemed worthy of it. But then we have to play that scenario out properly. So in this modern world, if this person is immigrating to, whether it's the US or Canada, as much as I feel bad for their particular situation, that does not automatically override my inherent and inalienable rights to not have my income or the productive income of my children or grandchildren or the unborn at this point in time to be plundered in order to subsidize, right? To me, proper immigration should just simply mean is if someone wants to move to another particular geographical area, then they have to do that on their own dime. They don't get to force other people to subsidize either their trip or how they get processed or whatever. And once again, I'll acknowledge that it's the government that's setting up this situation and scenario, but the government is the problem at the end of the day. It's not people who are proponents of not wanting to be stolen from or having my income plundered or having government picking winners or losers in the economy, regardless of their, whether they do have a sad story or not.
Well, again, get rid of the giveaways, make them pay for everything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's what I mean. So this is what I mean. We that's the area where we could agree with. But until that point comes, we are still going to be constantly living under this situation where the government is not, and it's not just that they're using, our income or the productive wealth of future generations to redistribute, to pick winners and losers, but they've even been. Oh, you still there, Chris?
I'm still here. Yeah.
Okay. So there's even been basically tacit admissions, and you can find the clips all over the place where some of these politicians and gleefully being cheered on by those in the media are actively seeking to do this mass immigration push as a means to actually, affect politics in a way that benefits them or their party. And that is another area where I think you end up with a problem, because if we end up, now these few people that you talk to, if they're people like especially if they're all for supporting individual freedom and liberty. Matter of fact, I would want more and more of those people to be here. But that is not the actual case when you're talking about government programs. Governments typically don't create programs that's going to be detrimental to government, right? That's kind of the antithesis of a government program.
Well, again, get rid of the programs. Put all that energy into what if we put all the energy into ending these welfare programs instead of all this energy that's, this anger about immigrants? I mean, what about all? I don't agree with her.
There's no anger.
I have my disagreements with her. Well, what about all the trouble that Lauren Southern has traveling now?
Right.
I'm not angry at her. I like Lauren Southern, although I don't agree with her on everything, but she has all this trouble going abroad too to talk about things. And of course, she put that video up yesterday about why she being friends with Brittany Pettibone makes it harder for her to travel. Again, I don't always agree with these people, but let them. Immigration. I mean, immigration has always been used as is going to be used as a political weapon. So get rid of the programs.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. But like I say, in the interim though, right? In the interim until and hopefully someday that does happen. In the interim, we are still stuck in a situation or scenario where once again, and here's another example. So, if historically, even when you're talking about immigration, right? So even if you just leave out the NAP out of it entirely and you just use the utilitarian aspect, because a lot of people like to use the utilitarian aspect, especially people that are more like capitalists or objectivist that's more thinking about the economy kind of thing. You can make the utilitarian argument that it's great for business and no doubt, right? No doubt, and economic growth if you bring a lot of migrants. But what we're seeing is the kind of people that they're bringing here to our countries these days are not migrants that are coming from. And like I said, I don't care about the color of their skin. I don't care what country they come from. But at least if you're purging immigrants from countries that are at least somewhat on par in terms of your economic prowess or your typical GDP, then you are actually talking that's at least something relatively or remotely resembling market competition. But what is actually being taken place is they're actively seeking out to bring people from countries where wages are massively inferior to the wages that people in like your country and my country are typically accustomed to, which in turn has a very suppressive effect on the wage demands of your domestic population, of your domestic workers. Because if you have someone that's coming here, that's willing to work for minimum wage, because compared to what they were making, from their original country, someone that literally has worked longer or has more experience and wants to bid up those wages. Well, if the employer can get the same thing done at a reduced wage, because they don't have to worry about bidding up for wages or actual market competition, because they can just use the state to circumvent that by having a constant never-ending stream of, well, in Canada they call them temporary foreign workers or mass immigration. That's an actual program. I'm not sure if they call that a program down in the United States, but in Canada it's literally classified as mass immigration, and it's a government program. So I mean, the fact that government alone is doing it tells you that it's already against the NAP, which is why I'm against it, right?
Wouldn't the same thing happen if a company in Toronto wanted to hire a bunch of workers from Saskatoon?
Well, no, because in Toronto,
Toronto is more expensive than Saskatoon.
Yes, but when you adjust for, this is the thing, when you're talking about expensive though, so your wages, because I have lived actually in multiple jurisdictions in Canada. So in New Brunswick, my wages are lower in New Brunswick than they are in Ontario. But the housing cost in this province is, if you actually adjust everything, you're talking about very minimal in terms of differences, because things in this part of the country are much, much cheaper. You can get a house in New Brunswick for $200,000-$300,000. You're not even getting a garage, a little shack for that if you're talking Toronto. So if you adjust it for everything else and your actual living expenses, then it kind of works out fairly similar. Whereas, like I said, if you're taking someone from a country whose incomes are on an order of magnitudes lower than what you're accustomed to, that's a big discrepancy. The difference that you can't get over that, right? You cannot choose, if you're living as a Canadian, you can't say, well, I'll race down to that lowest common denominator and work for even cheaper with this person, because you've been priced out of the market by, once again, more government programs, more government boondoggles, aka the housing market in this country, which is not built and based upon market fundamentals by any stretch of the imagination.
How regulated is your housing market? It's probably more regulated up there than it is here.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's unbelievable. And the crazy part about our housing market is, at least you guys, after the 2008 crisis, at least had somewhat of a reprieve and a little bit of a reset when the housing market kind of went down. Whereas in Canada, it literally stayed. They kept the Ponzi scheme going. They bailed out, and it was only reported in this country one time. I covered that whole thing when it happened. This was back in 2012, where they bailed out the big six banks in Canada to the tune of $114 billion, which at the time, two of the top three big banks could have been that there was enough money that you could have bought every single share of both of the two top banks, Royal Bank and I believe it was Scotia at the time. You could have bought every single share and then some with the amount of money they used to build the banks, which kept our housing market completely on track with that bubble, not just sustained, but growing to the point where, Canada's literally in a lot of our major jurisdictions like Ontario and British Columbia have outstripped almost every other nation on the planet in terms of how ridiculous it is to even get your foot into the housing market.
Well, housing seems to be a problem throughout Western civilization. I'm not sure if it's due to fiat money printing or zoning regulations or lots of things like that. Houston,
all
Texas,
of the above.
Houston, Texas, for example, is the fourth, one of the largest metro areas in the country now, but it actually has relatively cheap housing, much cheaper than, say, New York or Chicago. And part of it is they have no zoning there. I don't know. One thing you all have up in Canada is you've got 1/10 the population. You've got a lot more space, but I know that's not the only thing involved because a lot of that land, nobody wants to live there. But I don't know what kind of regulations you have. You might have regulations on who you can hire to build stuff, building codes, construction codes. I mean, well, certainly you wouldn't have any shortage of wood in Canada. You probably got plenty of timber.
Yeah. Well, that's the other part of this whole massive immigration is the people are constantly told by the thought leaders or those in the media that the reason why they need to now originally, and this is why I think more and more Canadians, I think even more Americans are even becoming more wiser to the whole mass immigration push, is because I think most Canadians and Americans, the reasonable ones at least, which I think represents the bulk, the plurality of the population, would not be upset in any way when you're like, when we were told the story, the narrative was, we're just wanting to pluck some great brains, some great minds from some foreign countries and bring that over here to produce and provide a lot of capital and the things that we could use, that we could benefit from. And like I say, I found very, very few people. I'm sure you could find the odd knuckle dragger once in a while that might get angry about something like that. But I'd say most people that I've ever engaged or talked to say there's no problem with that. But what we're actually seeing, the reality on the ground, rather than the rhetoric that we're told, is actually, no, you just, and even in places like here in New Brunswick, which is it's a new phenomenon here that even people in this part of the country are seeing, is no, a lot of these immigrants, right? Not to suggest that they aren't taking people who are the best and the brightest from certain jurisdictions around the globe, but a lot of these people are just basically, as far as I'm concerned, just slaves to the ruling class or servants, basically the chattel class. It looks like they just want to fill up the coffers of the chattel class. And we're even seeing today, it's not just my perception, that now, and with Canada having our population in just in the last 2 years increased by, I think, 1.4 million just in the last 2 years, we're seeing actually now GDP adjusted per capita is actually on the decline. So even the pretense, right? Even if you make the utilitarian argument that it's to increase, productivity and to generate all this wealth and income for the people, well, once again, that's not even proven to come to fruition. It's literally what I think it is, and I think this is where the area where you have to be able to put your mindset into different areas, right? So macro and micro is, I think, predominantly is whether it's, and I would say along the demographic line, it's predominantly people from the baby boomer cohort, although I will say obviously not all, but have fucked up not just their own families, but their own businesses and their own business models so intently that they can't rely on the younger people anymore. That literally the only way they can keep their schemes going, seemingly, is to constantly be plundering and purging some of these foreign countries of not just their resources, but their human resources. And that's the other area that I kind of wanted to point out is why would you think it's even a benefit? First of all, I think that's a net negative for this country, for the people who are trying to are vying for, having some kind of wage negotiations, because once again, the old law of supply and demand will make that
Yeah.
basically impossible. But the other side of that is, think about these other countries, right? So I'm sure, and you were mentioning Millet. Millet wouldn't be able to do a whole lot if he didn't at least have some good brain power underneath him. One man alone, as much as they have lots of great ideas and can be an inspiration, they need brain power underneath them to be able to implement those great ideas. So the more that our Western countries purge or plunder not just the economic, but the physical resources, the manpower from some of these other countries, well, then you're basically leaving some of these other countries to never are always going to remain third world or stagnated in lackluster growth. That's the other thing. I think it's actually kind of detrimental. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
I can see what you mean, but there are some countries that we'd be better off if they were third world than modern. I would much rather see China be third world than modern, and I would much rather see Russia be third world than modern, because they wouldn't be threats to the more civilized countries that are on their borders.
Right. Well, see, that's the thing. When you say Russia and China, well, that's the thing. Russia and China, you mean the government, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, yes. Well, their governments haven't changed much.
But what?
I know lots of great Russians, and I'm glad that America takes away the best Russians, because Russia is never going to be nothing more than a dictatorship that just has genocides, and they've got that history for 500 years. I don't think Russia can be fixed. If Putin dies, they'll just put up another one.
Oh yeah, but that's what I mean, though. The culture of each of these countries, though. So that's the thing. So the governments are the ones that create. I don't naturally. I don't know. I can't say with any validity information that I could say I have any amount of certainty in this, but I don't think, or I don't believe that just the Chinese people, are natural or have natural tendencies to be communists or tyrants who just now.
Well, I haven't been to these countries, but I certainly see enough. I certainly see enough of it from my own Americans. You certainly. I mean, Trudeau wouldn't be your prime minister if there weren't people who wanted him to be prime minister, right? I mean.
Yeah, but that's.
Certainly you're not a fan of Trudeau, but there certainly are. I mean, we wouldn't. I mean, I do blame Americans for the government. So if that doesn't apply to other countries, perhaps I'm wrong. But
well, no, but this is the area
I definitely blame Americans for helping out the government.
Yeah, but see, that's where, as a libertarian, and I would imagine you as an objectivist should be able to, sort through the wheat, sort the wheat from the chaff. Is yes, some, just like in Canada. Yes, there are some people, and to me, it's not even hard to figure out. It's those who have benefited from the state apparatus. Those are the people who want to maintain it because they've benefited from it. It's as simple as, and once again, we all know these people in our own families, in our own communities. We know who the ones that are who want to maintain the status quo because they greatly benefit from it. Whereas there are a lot of people in Canada and the US or some of these other countries, or like China, who don't. And to me, that's where it comes down to why the importance of the philosophy of liberty and the acknowledgement of the individual is, yes, some people definitely, right? And I would imagine that culture in Russia or China may be conducive to accepting the kind of tyranny that they have had to live under for so long, because maybe they themselves don't perceive that there's much or anything, any way to get out from underneath of it, or it's a hopeless cause, which I even see that a lot in our own countries. But once again, just because there are some bad actors in the any particular country who are benefiting from the status quo, we always got to take into account whether it's a minority or a majority. Because I will say too, in Canada, we don't even have to necessarily say it's a majority. Now, the U.S. with the two choices in your elections, it is kind of a majority or minority. Even although when you bring down the electoral college into it, it's still a little bit of a difference there. But in Canada, you can become the ruling government in Canada with as low as 23% of the voting, like the people who are eligible to vote. 23% of the people who actually show up to vote is all you need to get, because we live under the parliamentary system of first past the post. So you don't even have to get a majority. You can literally be ruled over by a tyranny of the minority in Canada without problem. And Trudeau's been doing that with the help of Jagmeet Singh, which is the head of the NDP. Now, Canadians, I will just say, Canadians actually chose, because they even seen after the first few years of Trudeau that even the ones that kind of trust the guy and still like to maintain the status quo, they were still very much hesitant to give the guy a majority. And they didn't, which is why the last election, he didn't get a majority. But with our strange system, the way it works is with this supply agreement that the NDP, basically a handshake between the two, is I'll keep propping you up as long as you give me a little bit back, right? So you feed me and I'll feed you. And that's the way our system's been functioning basically since the last election. So you don't even have to have a majority. So what I always worry about, and like Ayn Rand said, is if you care about the minority, the individual is the smallest minority on the planet. So I, as an individual, I'm an individual. So as much as there are a lot of Canadians who are benefiting from the status quo, and I'm sure there are a lot of Americans who will vote for Biden who are benefiting from the status quo, you got to be also thinking about the people who aren't. And that's kind of where my area relies. And of course, that includes me. So, which is, I find it quite personal when I'm the one that's on the opposite side of that, right? And actually, I will just say this, just to be consistent, even if I were benefiting at other people's expense, I am that kind of a person that would actually at least point out that I would rather, even in the competitive world I've lived in my whole life, in terms of as a teenager, I started building engines. I would never want to win any race. I've won many races. I've been in a lot of competitive avenues. And I tell you, I would never want to win by the fact of, tripping up or sabotaging the other guy, right? In the marketplace, whether it's ideas or any kind of competition, I want it to happen so that, it happens based on competence and what you actually bring to the table rather than once again. So that's the way I look at it in terms of the mass immigration. It's not that I have anything against immigrants. It's the fact that these government programs are constantly picking winners or losers in the economy. And there's a lot of really great people who are being massively harmed along the way, in particular, the young people.
Well, we need to get rid of these programs that pick winners and losers. And, I got to say too, as far as, I definitely think the city of New York is irredeemable. I certainly think the state of California is irredeemable. And I'd probably say that about a few other states and a few other parts of America. I mean, I honestly don't care what happens to them. And I just hope they lose their best people. And, this was a theme in The Sovereign Individual, is that eventually governments are going to have to treat citizens like customers, and citizens will just go from whatever government treats them well. I mean, really, the most peaceful solution to Venezuela is to have all the good Venezuelan immigrants leave and just let them have nothing but the socialists. And then who knows what happens? I don't know. They'll have to grow their own food, or maybe I'm at the point too where I don't think, and this is one reason why I focus so much on Milei, is I'm thinking a lot there. And I don't know what your situation is, but it sounds like you have kids.
Yep.
I think this is one of the dividing lines for libertarians. I think a lot of American libertarians at least have one eye or one foot possibly looking elsewhere. I've certainly met Canadians who have left Canada. But, if you've got a wife and kids, you're probably pretty much figure you're 100% committed to staying in Canada. And, I want open borders because I don't want to have to crawl under razor wire to get out of here.
Right. Yeah.
One aspect that I definitely think is going to have to leave America is, I think, I would definitely tell them, and Roger Ver is a good example. Roger Ver is the creator of Bitcoin Cash. I think anybody who wants to work on a cryptocurrency project or start a cryptocurrency project, they should get out of America,
right,
and go to El Salvador or some other place that's crypto friendly and just do their project there and not even try to comply with the federal regulations. And I hope they all move out, and I hope they'll bring down the American financial system faster that way anyway.
Yeah, actually, tell you the truth, when you're talking about that stuff, I think that's actually one of the actually few areas where I see, and of course, you Americans once again are in a much, much better position because of your Republican style system of governments and the way it's been federalized, is you're much, much better or susceptible to putting yourself in a position where you can, just like consumers vote with their dollars, like you were saying, is vote with your feet. And that is one area where I say, even in Canada, you still there, Chris? I lost you there for a sec. Okay, there we go. Your mic's muted there, Chris.
Just having allergies. That's all. I'm trying not to.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, so with Canada's system, there's only really one province in this whole place that it would be at least somewhat conducive to being more limited government, I guess. It would be Alberta is probably the only province in this. But it's the thing with the way our system is set up, we don't have the ability. One thing about you guys down there is, you can, and I've seen a lot of very prominent, not just conservatives, but even people who like your Dave Rubins, let's say, like that come from the left, right? Who have left, or even Elon Musk and others who have actually not just voted with their dollars, but even with their businesses. Yeah. And they've taken them to some of these jurisdictions who are at least much more predisposed to being more free market oriented, even though we know there's nothing that's perfect these days. There's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of red tape for anything. But even in terms of the people moving, well, during COVID, of course, then you had Florida, then you had you got New Hampshire, which is a New Brunswicker, New Hampshire's fairly close up here, but at least you have some jurisdictions, and not just one in particular, right? But you have multiple jurisdictions. So if you like the cold weather, right, maybe you can move to New Hampshire, right? If you like the boreal forest and you like that kind of different types of seasons, or you have the choice of go all the way to the east coast at the bottom end of Florida. If you want to try that, your hands at that, or if you got Texas, you got the Dakotas, right? Was it South Dakota's quite? I think Arizona is a little bit more friendly to liberty.
Yeah, well, I always think of the states. I always think first of the states that still have no state income tax.
Right. And, yeah. Well, that's New Hampshire. Yeah. Yeah.
New Hampshire. Yes. Well, New Hampshire has the Free State Project.
Yeah,
and I think, and I definitely although I don't want to live there because of the cold, I wholeheartedly support what they're doing.
Yeah.
There's also Monte Libero, which is a free state project in Montenegro in Europe. I think it's a lot of Russians living there now. They're going to try to turn Montenegro into a free state. So that should be interesting because almost all the Russian libertarians have gotten out of Russia.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. But that's what I mean. So at least, like I say, at least you down in the U.S., you have that ability. Yeah. And I think that will ultimately play a role because, of course, it's going to take time. But, when the people of New York and California, come to realize that, they're now at the point where there's less people pulling the cart than there are that actually, sitting in the cart, then eventually that system will break down on its own by simple fact that the most productive people, and that really, that goes with the whole Atlas Shrugged thing too, right? Is if you have the most productive people, the greatest minds, the greatest innovators and entrepreneurs, you leave your jurisdiction and you see that kind of a draining taking place, then that's going to have a definite effect, a negative effect on the people, and it definitely will have a potential to shift the mindset. Maybe not for some of the older people, but as younger people go through this and they see the differences and the discrepancies, I'm sure they would be much more conducive with acknowledging, well, geez, maybe we should take on some more of that free market type of thinking because it seems to be beneficial. That's the beauty of the market, right? That's something I think objectivists and libertarians all agree with pretty much for sure is, and I think it should be brought out even when you're talking about at the political realm, is competition. Competition is key. It's the only thing that's going to show you what's actually going to be conducive. And as a libertarian who has a live, let live mentality, and I've said this to even socialist minded people, is it's a strange thing that, I got a lot of people that hate capitalism, but they want to constantly be surrounded by capitalists. And what it is what I've come to learn is they need the capitalists to produce the capital in order for them to skim a large, substantial portion for themselves off the top. Whereas a capitalist does not necessarily or require a parasitical class to produce or provide. And that's the area where I think, a live let live mentality sounds good, and it is if you're much more conducive with being an entrepreneur or self-sustaining or living with a more trade oriented live let live mentality. Whereas the people who don't or who aren't productive are never going to want to vote away their entitlements or the benefits they get from that kind of redistribution. And that's the area where we eventually become outnumbered. And that's, I think, what we're both experiencing in America and Canada today, and other countries as well, is we're getting to the point where there's way more pigs at the trough, or more people, sitting in the cart than pulling it, right?
Yeah. I definitely think that's a problem. I mean, I just said you have to get rid of the welfare state, but I think we've also back in my hometown, we had a Pakistani immigrant who was a cataract surgeon. He was an eye doctor. He was a very well respected man in the community. And this was in a small town where almost everybody was white. And
Mm.
but he gave a lot back to the community. And I went and I his daughter was in school with me, and just
Right.
he was a good citizen. A
Oh yeah,
lot of
no doubt.
immigrants, I think, work harder to say, yes, I'm part of the community. I want to be part of this community. So sometimes they put more effort into it. It's
Yeah. Oh yeah, for
you know,
sure. Which is why, like I say, which is why I think so. Let's clarify this right now. So I think we both can agree that like none of our angst, anger, or disdain is directed towards the ones that want to come to our countries to, or at least what they believe, to better their life. That I think we're both in agreement there, because I definitely have nothing against those kind of people. And I could see, even if I was living in a foreign country, because that's one thing I'm really, really good at, is putting myself in another person's shoes and thinking along the lines, yeah, of course I would do that. If I knew I could go to a country where, or at least my perceptions were, now a lot of them, in particular in Canada, I'm not sure so much in the United States, but in Canada, some of these immigrants that are coming here, especially within the last couple of years, are finding out, yeah, you were promised a bill of goods that doesn't actually exist. Because that's the problem.
yes,
It's not just the old stock Canadians who are having a really difficult times getting into the housing market or getting their health care provided, or all these other things, right? It's the old law of supply and demand. The immigrants are coming here too, and a lot of the immigrants are basically being shuffled around, just like they're doing in the United States. Well, in Canada, they shuffle them around to the predominantly the big urban centers, so like your Torontos and your Vancouvers and your Montreals. And what we're seeing now is, now these people are ended up, you see the long lines of them, and it's still mighty cold here in Canada at times, and you see them just lined up at the food banks, or having to live in these makeshift like tent cities, or just set up somewhere, or living in other people's vehicles. So, and a lot of them you'll even see that are being interviewed by some of the media pundits in this country, or at least some of the alternative media ones, are even saying, yeah, like I watched a Rebel News media account of a guy saying, basically telling some of his people from his country, I think he came from originally from Nigeria, is like, yeah, don't come here. Like, yeah, it's nothing like we were promised. Because that's the other thing too, is it's actually, I think it's
yeah,
a great detriment to bring people here, to promise them stuff, and basically treat them as second class citizens, like I say, because
yes,
a lot of them are coming here and basically being put into jobs that are far beneath something that, as far as when I was growing up, the kind of jobs that a lot of these people are going into were something that you did as a part-time job before you went
yeah,
off to college or university, right?
yeah. I mean, if you got somebody who lives on the equator in Africa and they want to
Mm.
go to Winnipeg, and I just say to them, I said, have you ever experienced a winter in Winnipeg? It's like, it's like, maybe you don't want to go here. I mean,
Yeah,
I do wonder, sometimes if these, and I think that's you hear a lot of stories like that, with, sometimes, with women who are promised jobs and then they're forced into prostitution where they go,
right.
which I think is a real, uh, certainly is a very serious problem. But I think, you lie to these people, and,
Mm.
uh, also, I often jokingly say, if you want to make these, men from South America go back to South America, just have them spend time with, some of these, far left women for a
Mm.
few hours. They'll go back home in a minute.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, uh,
yeah,
they'll say, yeah, what kind of women are these? I mean, are these women, or just? I
yeah.
think I'm going to go home. where the
Well,
women are civilized.
just out of curiosity, Chris, how old are you actually?
I'm almost 53.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so you're the same age as me. So you're a Gen Xer. Well, this is the thing. So this is something else I think we should share in common.
Yeah.
Is what I find, and it's really sometimes I think, is this like Machiavellian? Is this the old reverse psychology? Is it what the hell is taking place? Because one thing that I acknowledged growing up is, and growing up in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, this was a time when not just AIDS, but like gays and lesbians, that whole movement was coming to fruition and stuff. But you know what? The way it was rolled out through the culture, right? So through your arts and entertainment, through the media, even I would say to a lesser degree to the political class, it wasn't set up in such a divisive type of scenario or narrative. So my generation, I think you're the same way. And of course, I grew up in a family that I guess would have been probably considered liberal growing up. But even people that were conservative or somewhat they would call themselves centrist, most of us growing up, and because of the way it was presented to us, whether it's through arts and entertainment and movies and music and television shows and comedies, sitcoms, series and stuff, is it wasn't a divisive or a wedge issue. And most people adopted that very live, let live mentality, at least in terms of, how other people live their lives. They might say, you would always hear, yeah, it's not for me. I don't like that kind of stuff, but hey, to each their own kind of thing. That was very much a predominant mindset. And I would say for most Canadians, if you were just someone out on the street corners and asking anyone, regardless of their political persuasion, but the way things are done now, once again, with big government being the major factor in this, which is constantly driving home the narrative that, well, first you're constantly told that, if you're white and middle-aged and you're heterosexual, you're the worst person on the planet. But then this constant, pitting the sexes against each other, pitting religions against each other, the way the identity politics and the divisiveness has been played out. And then the sheer fact, like I say, were just examples like bringing immigrants here and not even just offering them to give them a helping hand so that they can get a start in life, but literally creating the biggest wedge issue ever. Where, like I say, even in the people that I know and surround myself with, we're talking about the kind of people I talk with or surround myself with, anything but racist or sexist or any of that stuff. Total live, let live type of people. That's the way kind of people I like to hang out with. But when you're constantly, when it's in your face almost on a regular basis, where the government is like picking winners to the point where you can come here and get, like I say, free dental care, free eye prescription, free, where you can't even get that as, a Canadian living here. How does that not, like that you can't help? That's just going to create animosity. That's going to create resentment. And it's something that I think is so destructive, not just for the people here, but it's obviously going to cause people to start targeting people based on the superficial aspects of their skin tone or the what's between their legs. So now you got so much division created that people aren't just attacking, what the LGBTQ community, but now you have people who are on constant heightened state of alert because of the way everything is presented to them. Whereas now, if you do see an immigrant or someone from one of these special interest communities, your automatic go-to mindset then is, oh, are these people the enemies that I'm constantly told that are supposed to be? And that, I think, is the biggest issue I see, because of the way it's being done, right? This is the problem, is natural migration. There's a big difference in the equation too, in terms of a migrant wanting to come to this country, is if they have to do it all completely on their own dime and through at least some kind of a channel, right? Where there's some kind of vetting or some sort, right? Just like in your own home, you're not going to let just anybody go, live in your sleep in your bed at night, nor would you want, just anybody to be rolling across a border, because yes, most people, I would say, do it for good reasons, but there has to be at least something to determine, when you live under the kind of systems we live in, is if the people are coming here for good or bad intentions.
Yeah.
Once again, with all this division taking place, to me, it just seems like the most perfect recipe for disaster, and this constant hammering away at identity politics, which is driving a wedge between not just families, but communities and the entire country, to the point where now it's not just Quebec that used to be the thing. Now, I've heard Alberta, they want to exit, right? Although whether it ever happens, I do.
Yeah.
Good luck on that.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think that's the major problem. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I was going to ask, I don't know, how much authority do the provinces have, and how much authority do local governments have? I think American states probably still have a lot of authority, and certainly, for example, in America, county sheriffs have a whole lot of authority. I mean, a county sheriff can nullify a law if he wants to, and if he chooses not to enforce it, it won't be enforced in his county.
Right.
I don't know what it's like in Canada, but there's
obviously
there are differences.
Yeah, well, that's the problem with Canada too, in the simple fact that we have some jurisdictions that have their own municipal or provincial police forces, but a substantial and sizable portion of our jurisdictions, in particular, I'll even mention here on the East Coast in Canada, where I live in New Brunswick, it's predominantly the RCMP. So the RCMP is what would be which is our federal police force, and how that creeped in, that obviously took decades for that to take place. But yeah, a lot of our jurisdictions, and now I will say there was a movement for a little while, it seems to have died down now, to maybe make things more susceptible to being more localized. Although I don't think at the federal level they would still have any kind of authority, because it is a very top-down system in this country. But no, in our jurisdictions, you're literally patrolled, by the federales, like there's a federal police force, and it's a weird joint kind of adventure. It's something that should have never been allowed to take place in the first place, right? Because I think that has actually greatly contributed to this whole mindset where people don't even feel like in New Brunswick, I'll just say, in our small community where we live in, other than when I was growing up. Now, like I say, this would have been in the 70s. Since that time, for those officers that were around at the time, since then until now, it's been nothing but a constant influx of police from different jurisdictions all around the country, and they use these, especially the rural areas, as their training ground. So they don't even have any natural relationship with any of the people. They've never lived there, and they're just there to follow orders and do their bidding, which creates a lot of strife and a lot of resentment among the people and the police forces.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of times, here, still the local police force in the small town is taken from the community, so everybody knows who the town police chief is. He was born and raised there, and he knows who all the people are.
Right.
So you end up where because there's definitely a divide, I would say, from how small town police officers act in America and how the big city cops act.
Yes,
I mean,
sure.
but it's kind of interesting. I don't know though. Although one thing, you don't have nearly as many police shootings up there though as we do down here.
No, and I would say there's a few contributing factors to that, but we'll just move beyond that point anyways.
Yeah.
But I would say a healthy culture of conformity is one of a major contributing factor in Canada. Like I say, our whole history and heritage is really, if you think about it, and a little bit soul crushing for a liberty oriented guy like myself, because our whole history and heritage is predominantly, acceptance of a ruling class and actual, not just one, but redundant layers too. We've got two layers of a ruling class. So we're still kind of quasi part of the monarchy, right? So,
yes. That's one thing I asked. You've been talking about immigrants. Are most of the immigrants in Canada from other Commonwealth countries, I suppose?
No, not nowadays. Not at least since the Trudeau Liberals have come to power. What we're seeing predominantly these days are, Northern African, Middle Eastern, like Syrian, Ukraine, a substantial now of Ukrainians because of the whole thing that's taking place with Russia. But no, it's predominantly like I say, Africa and the Middle East for the most part.
So you're getting the same kind of immigration as they get in Europe. I mean, I think most of our immigration is still, crossing the border at Mexico, or even coming up from further south.
Right.
Yeah, that's one thing that you realize that some of these immigrants, it's a Herculean effort just to get here, and most Americans would never even try to do that kind of trip.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of self-select for people who at least are tougher than the average person.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well,
Yeah,
so anyway, so just to once again, just another point of clarification. So because I think based on the way our interaction has gone so far, I think we could both agree that in the absence of the state, forced
yeah,
redistribution and picking winners or lose the economy, I think we would both agree that the best policy is to allow natural migration, but at least some means or
yeah,
mechanism of accountability. And I think the best
yeah,
means for accountability, and Tim Moen has talked about this, I'm not sure if you've ever heard him mention it before too,
yeah,
is sponsorship, right? So if I want immigrants to come to this country, or if I'm someone that's from, let's say Senegal or somewhere in Africa or in the Middle East, and I want someone from my, foreign country of origin to come here, that should be fine, but there should be at least be someone that's willing to at least vouch or at least be held somewhat responsible. Obviously, how that would actually work out in real life, have to iron out those details, but there would have to be at least something, right, to incentivize people to be like you say, bringing the right kind of people here, because we're always thinking about people like you or I would imagine, and I like to personally think that most people are generally decent. Although I acknowledge we're all susceptible to doing bad things, we're all fallible human beings. But I think
yeah,
most people, for just for, and not even out of benevolence, I think most people are just rationally self-interest. And I think that rational self-interest is, yeah, if you treat people at least reasonable, and you're not, being an asshole or stealing from them or trying to control them or stuff like that. I think most people realize that that's the best baseline for human cooperation and interaction. But once again, in this current situation or scenario now, because everything is just a fog, we are getting not just those good people, not just those people that I'm just like you. Matter of fact, some of the people, I've mentioned this before too. Definitely, I want to emphasize I'm not against the immigrants, because I believe some of these immigrants, and I'll get even other people that share my skin color mad at me, typically conservatives. Well, I'll say actually, most of the people who have ever did me harm in my life look just like me. Right. So to me, it has nothing even to do with the skin color or their country of origin. To be honest with you, when I first moved up to Toronto when I was a kid, I was only 12 years old. My parents moved us. I had just turned 12. I had heard stories, and a lot of people that were, knuckle dragging, talking about all, black people or Muslims, and you get this weird notion or concept in your mind that these people are bad somehow. But it didn't take, but I think 2 or 3 exchanges, interaction with people when I was younger, realized it seemed pretty normal to me, right? And that's all it took. And then I just, from that point forward, and I've done this my whole life now, I just treat people as you're a decent, reasonable people until you prove to me otherwise, right? So, if you, and then you'll find out, then yes, the guy that you think can be a pretty nice guy,
yeah,
which I can be, I can be just as vicious as the next if you want to mess with me. But my first step, is usually I try to treat people with the golden rule, the same way I want to be treated. And I got to tell you, I definitely don't think that the immigrations, the ones that are coming here, or all of them, are the ones that are going to be the detriment to a society. But what I do recognize is,
yeah,
because government is picking winners or losers, I think there's a lot of very bad things that has the potential to happen, not just to some of the Canadians that are here today, but some of these immigrants, just by the way it's being done.
yeah. Well, I've said many times that I think a healthy culture is going to attract good immigrants, but if you've now you have a bad culture, you will attract bad immigrants. But the
Right.
problem, again, you have to fix your culture, which I,
Yeah.
I don't know how you necessarily do that. And another thing that comes up, with immigration, is we certainly heard the stories of Canadians coming across the border for various health care, and
Mm.
and there's also Americans who will go across the border to Mexico to get health care. I don't know how that would work under a sponsorship system, but certainly maybe you would need to have them, make a deposit on the health care they're going to get just to prove. But I'm coming into your country and I'm going to spend money. It's like, let me
Mm.
in. I want to spend money. It's like,
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
I mean, that's certainly something you'd want to favor. I think even
Yeah.
if I booked an Airbnb, I think, and that's something I've noticed when I go somewhere. Almost always they want to know, where are you staying.
Uh,
My scariest border situation was actually trying to get into Canada once. this was even in 2000, before the World Trade Center. But and the big issue was they talked with me for like 10 or 15 minutes, but she didn't like the fact that I didn't have a hotel reservation. I was just gonna drive into Canada and wing it. Okay, there's a hotel, stop there, get a room.
Right.
I think if I'd had a hotel reservation, I would have had less issues. But
yeah,
that often comes up. They want to know where my Airbnb is.
Yeah, that's crazy. So I think, like I say, so I think we could agree that it's not the immigrants per se, although we will both acknowledge that there's definitely going to be some bad people, but I think the overwhelming majority, I agree with you, that are just people that want to better their lot in life, and that we should not blame them or hold any grievances or grudges against these people. I am 100% on board with you there. But once again, this is the problem that, and like I say, we've had ample time and now to kind of hammer this stuff out. But once again, we live in this current situation where the government, whatever the reasons, like there's lots of people who have lots of, and actually good evidence to suggest of some of the reasons why governments do it. But regardless of the underlying reason, whether it's for utilitarian reason, whether it's to grow the GDP, whether it's to, fill up some of the vacancies or voids in the workplace, right? Whatever the excuse or reason, or whether it's for political reasons to, change the demographics to get certain parties to have more votes. To me, the underlying reason behind it is not nearly as important as the principle, which is the NAP, which suggests that I or my kids or you, Chris, nobody should be forced to prop up or subsidize other human beings. That to me is not that I'm not compassionate or wish the best for these human beings. Like I say, the good ones I definitely do, and the ones that are conducive with live let live mentality, I wish more and more of them were here, and maybe some of these old collectivists here in Canada can maybe find somewhere else to go. Maybe these authoritarian collectivists, the Trudeau likes, since he's such a big fan of the Trudeau or the China's basic dictatorship, maybe he should take his ass over to China, right? That seems like it'd be more conducive with his kind of mindset. So once again, it's not that, but I think, and I'm going to ask you if you agree, I think it's wrong, it's unethical for governments to be forcing certain people to prop up or subsidize others, I'll even include whether they're domestic or from foreign countries.
Yes, and there's something else too I haven't mentioned yet also, but I know at least in the case of America, we have went into a lot of these countries and destabilized them. Yes. I mean, if we would just legalize all our drugs, that might very well make Mexico a lot safer place to live. Although I've been to Mexico many times, I love Mexico. And don't get me started on the number of times that the USA has stuck its nose into Haiti's business, which is the biggest 100%. Basket case in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, I've met, and I've probably in my lifetime I wonder, it's more a question of how many immigrants have I not met. I mean, I've probably met immigrants from just about every country in the Western Hemisphere now, but it's really, I mean, there's some of these countries, our interference has not made things better, and we end up breaking their countries, and then they come here. It's
actually you make an excellent point, and actually I will even just say, just to follow up on that point and emphasize it even more so, is even some of these countries that you're talking about in terms of Africa, the northern part of Africa or the Middle East. The reason why they are coming here is predominantly, as you know, and Ron Paul was the guy that got me really actively involved in terms of the whole foreign interventionism thing, right? Is if you think about it, Syria, right? Or Libya, Somalia, all these countries, like you say, were greatly destabilized by, the military industrial complex and the foreign interventionism of our countries. And that, I think, is absolutely devastating and destructive. And just the simple fact that a lot of libertarians were talking about that at the time, even when it comes to Hillary Clinton and the State Department going after Gaddafi, people even were talking about this at the time. A lot of very prominent libertarians, and I'm sure you might have been already aware of this too, is you're going to see a huge, massive migration movement the minute that corridor is opened up, because Libya is literally just across the Mediterranean to Europe.
Yes.
And Gaddafi, as much as I think we could all agree nobody's a big fan of Gaddafi, I'm not a fan of any tyrants or rulers, period. But I will just say that, a lot of that mass immigration, a lot of that mass movement of people across the globe was prevented by the fact that there was at least,
Yeah.
some bit of a bulwark against it. Whereas now it's basically a free for all where there, once again, and this is what makes people so much more concerned about this stuff, is because when you recognize, now me, I'm not worried about it. I'm especially where I live, I'm not worried about this stuff. But there are a lot of people who are genuinely concerned that, and the kind of rhetoric that Trump espouses about, the gangs and the rapists and all this stuff. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be very susceptible for falling for that because they recognize there is no genuine vetting that's really taking place these days.
Yeah, there's also a very corrupt system of, I don't know, maybe corrupt lawyers or scam artists who will say, hey, I'll help you get into America. Just give me $5,000. And then he doesn't do anything. Sorry, your application was denied, but you're out the money. I mean, I have another friend who, who met a guy in Jamaica, and she was trying to, I don't know what happened with their relationship, but they were going to get married. She was trying to bring him here. And this guy knew the Marleys. He was friends with the Marleys, and yet he couldn't get into America. I mean, the Marleys are basically royalty in Jamaica. Right. But he was just a guy who wanted to, come with his, be with his fiance, wife, girlfriend. So it's really kind of interesting to see how that works. And, Jamaica is not a beautiful place like people say it is. The people who go to the resorts don't really see Jamaica. It's it's got a whole lot of issues. There's a lot of places that have issues, and I've certainly heard horror stories of how North Koreans are treated in China, which is why a lot of them end up in Mongolia. I was in Ulaanbaatar a few years ago, and it was interesting to see all the Korean restaurants in Mongolia. It's like, and I said, wow, well, that must be all those Korean immigrants. And that's one thing I've noticed about immigrants. They come here and they open those restaurants. They're always open restaurants and food trucks. They love to do that. Yeah.
Well, that kind of takes us full circle back to where we originally started out in our interaction on X. And I am, like I say, I'm 100% in agreement with you there, because I am one of those people that I definitely have a very international taste for cuisine. And I love all the things, especially in particular when I lived in Toronto. The two apartment buildings, the taller buildings that were just to the right of the buildings I lived in, were predominantly a lot of gentlemen, families, I should say, but the guys that I got to know were gentlemen from like India and Pakistan. And oh my goodness, as a Irish, well, my heritage is Irish, Scottish, and a Canadian on the East Coast, lots of meat and potatoes, but boy, oh boy, never had so much great, spicy, amazing food in my entire life as the once I started learning about some of these different and varying cultures. And I've come to appreciate, and of course, this is at the individual level, because there's bad people from every, race or creed. But like a lot of the people that, are getting, that's the other thing, is they're getting the brunt of some of this retaliation from people because of the way identity politics is being played. But some of the greatest people, and I'm not even saying this just as a stretch, I'm telling you, some of the greatest people that I actually met, and I don't know why, if it's because I don't know what it is with their culture, but people that are formerly from India that have come to Canada, some of the greatest people I've ever met, not just in terms of talking to, but their personality, how they carry themselves, the kind of their work ethic, but even stuff. I was kind of a fan of, I like to buy things, and being a libertarian, paying taxes and all that stuff is not something that I'm a big fan of. But up in Toronto, we had a few of them. I don't know what they call them down the States, maybe bazaars, but they call them flea markets up here. It's basically where a bunch of vendors sets up your booth, and you can sell anything: electronics, clothing, socks, perfume, cologne, whatever. And I'm telling you, the best people I ever had to interact with, and almost to a T, anytime I look now, I get that I'm kind of doing some stereotyping here, but it's applicable, and I think they would, a lot of the people would accept it, is in terms of you want to haggle, right, or negotiate on a price on something. Some of the Middle Eastern guys, like, well, I guess you would call Middle Eastern in terms of, well, yeah, I guess India, Pakistan, is these are guys that really know how to do the haggling. Like that, to me, I never walked out of any of those sales ever paying full price ever. Now, whether it's just they're really good at their salesmanship, right, which could be the case, but it always kept me walking away from the interaction feeling pretty darn good about the scenario. It was great. So, like I say, at the end of the day, it really doesn't come down to me. There are stereotypes, of course. There are generalizations that you can make for particular cultures that may be applicable or not. But once you take it and break it down to the individual level, once again, it really comes down to what kind of a person are you in terms of, like, do you have a live, let live mentality? Are you going to seek to use, the state to impose your will on me? Those are the things that matter to me most. Whether someone wants to come into this country and just get a job and take care of their family, I say kudos to them. I say bravo to them if they're the kind of people who are family oriented and want to take care of things and lead by example. I'm a big fan of that. And actually, that's something that's very much lacking in some of the old stock people in our countries these days, which I wish they would emulate. So once again, this is not about being anti-immigrant. It's against the state constantly picking winners or losing in the economy.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, we need to get away from that. And I also know a lady who I think has lived in Mexico as an illegal immigrant for like 8 years.
Okay.
She and her partner went there, ran away on marijuana charges, and
oh, really?
Yes. So that's why they went to Mexico, and she's not coming back to. She's going to stay there as long as she can until she can get those charges dropped. But yeah.
Yeah. Jeez. Yeah. See, as a libertarian, I am so against, I'm sure you are too, the whole drug charge thing. Anyways, in terms of, obviously I'm not saying that, some of these things are great. I get a lot of people use them as vices, whatever the reason. But to me, if there's no victim, there should be no crime as far as I'm concerned. And that used to be actually, generally understood by people that predominantly come from the Anglosphere, right? Because you go all the way back to Magna Carta, all the way up to this point. It was basically all the jurisprudence and the common law knowledge that was built up over those centuries was under the baseline knowledge that our laws are supposed to be based on something akin to a universal ethic, and where there had to actually be a victim for something to be considered an actual crime. But we've moved very much beyond that. Now, I am kind of pleased to see that at least in the 21st century, even some of our crazy Western societies are at least moving a little bit away from that. Now, in Canada, we have legalization, but the part that I find a little bit disturbing about the legalization in Canada now under the Trudeau regime is it actually, believe it or not, now I don't know how harshly it's enforced, because I don't live in an area now where that would be as conducive, where I'd be susceptible to that kind of culture. But there's actually more charges on the book now that legalization has come to fruition than there was prior. Not to mention the fact that in Canada, there used to be a sizable amount of people that would kind of skirt the lines, kind of the gray area of the market, where they would function as dispensaries, but not legal. But the police or the enforcers didn't bother them much because they recognized that he's playing whack-a-mole. But now, actually, with legalization, what has actually come with legalization is a very, very heavy-handed push to basically try to knock out those who supply, right, the ones who actually function in the free market, and replace or substitute them with these cronies.
So so you basically had a freer market when you had a black market than you do now. That's what I feel. I've jokingly said that in America, if you want to make insulin cheaper, make it illegal. I mean, you just
which is crazy, because it would sound counterintuitive to a person, right? But that's actually one area that I've always kind of looked at as especially once I learned about the philosophy of liberty and the non-aggression principle and property rights and self-ownership. A lot of people banter around, a lot of rhetoric gets talked about when it talk about things. They say, well, where's this free market that you're talking about? And I used to be able to point out, well, at least here in Canada, it's called the marijuana business, and it's been flourishing since I was a kid, since I was a teenager till the time, like, I'm 53 now. There's never been any time in my life that if I want to get my hands on some marijuana, it's never been it's literally at your fingertips. No, no matter what part of this country you live in. And that is one area that actually is the free market. And once again, I used to even explain to people when I was younger. So just to show you how much government destroys, the market and the valuation or your purchasing power, is when I was a teenager, just starting to partake into some hashish in Scarborough, Ontario, it was $5 to $10 a gram. depending on, how many middlemen there were. Really, that's really what it came down to, is how
Yes.
many different middlemen there were, right? Is $5 to $10 a gram. Well, fast forward to today, or even just prior to legalization, the price was the same. There was no inflation, right? Why? Because they function genuinely in something that's at least closest to an actual free market. And that's why I try to, and especially for the young people who are very much, into the weed scene, right? I try to explain them, try to bring a little bit of economic knowledge to them. There's a perfect real world example of how government created inflation. And I mean, government is always inflating the currency, always devaluing our money, but yet the market was still constantly trying to supply. They kept finding more and more efficiencies to keep their prices at least at the same levels, which is the amazing power of a free market, of competition, as opposed to anything the government starts to regulate, which then you start to see things do the exact opposite.
Yes. I wanted to ask you too, by the way, do you have we're starting to, this is starting to get some attention in the US, especially the state of New York, the
Right.
problem of people squatting in houses and then the government is protecting them and saying, oh, you're a tenant. You have the rights of a tenant, even though they never got the consent of the landlord and they
Mm,
never asked permission and they never signed a lease or never paid anything. Do you have
right.
that issue going on in Canada too? It's definitely,
Yeah.
it's happening in some states, but not in others.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, in our
Yeah.
example, it's not so much in terms of squatters per se. It's just that people will knowingly go in to get into these places and then just not pay rent, because they know that they can keep the bureaucracy, and
Well,
with the
yeah,
human rights tribunals, that
yeah,
they can keep that going for years. So they basically
yeah.
get to live for free for years on end. And actually, it's funny you
No,
mentioned that, because I was actually watching a story just the other day. I believe it was in Michigan. Maybe you saw the same one, with that woman that was basically arrested for trying to kick, basically, yeah, some of these people,
yeah.
these homeless people, out of
Well,
her, that
yeah.
were basically
Well,
occupying her home. Yeah.
well, it could be an issue like with what happened with, my brother died almost 2 years ago. And, it takes a while to get all that stuff settled.
Mm,
Yeah, it can probably take a year, or so to get the house sold. But then you
right.
finally get the house sold. But then you go, oh, wait, well, somebody's living here. How are you living here? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
you got that problem. You got to,
Well,
it does
that's the
depend on the
thing.
state. Yeah, it's definitely an issue. I just wondered if that was up there in Canada too. It's a,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I could definitely see how it would be definitely something more susceptible to happening in the U.S., whereas you guys would have probably way more in terms of housing structure and infrastructures than we even do here in Canada. The problem with Canada, and the reason why our housing market, well, I mean, there's a multitude of reasons behind that, but we are so behind the eight ball in terms of actual building, right? Even to remotely stay up
yeah,
with the supply. And the problem, of course, the way that works out, and it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And the reason why in here it's kind of like a third rail topic. It might even be to a lesser degree in the US, although I think much less so. But the problem here in Canada, and I was reading a Globe and Mail article, is, and of course, they're wise enough to only use the word investor when they say that, what is it now? Canada's up to, what was it, 23.7 or 25.7? It's one of those two. So in around a full quarter of the houses in this country are owned by, now they just call them investors, right? And of course, some of them may very well be foreign investors, although some of the jurisdictions have that now imposed restrictions on some of the external factors in terms of investors from foreign countries. But really what you're talking about, and this is an uncomfortable thing for people to talk about, because this is the problem with government picking winners or losers in the economy and playing these kinds of schemes, is what that really means. These investors, a lot of them are not my parents, but predominantly people from the baby boomer predominantly generation that got to buy their homes in the 50s and 60s at 20, 30, $40,000. And now we're sitting on the proverbial gold mine, right? And they're using that speculative wealth to in turn buy themselves their second, third, fourth, fifth, you know. And that is now, this is the other thing with government doing this stuff, is they've literally set up now that they've destroyed the purchasing power of people's actual wealth. So there's no such thing as anyone saving money, stashing money under your mattress anymore. So the only thing that Canadians really genuinely have left as their golden goose is the house that they're sitting on. So even a lot of these Canadians who they themselves are seeing their own grandkids being squeezed out of the housing market and having to live in very precarious situations, off putting having kids and doing anything for years and decades on end, but they're unwilling to let this housing market crash because they are relying on that speculative wealth in their house to retire. That's another major contributing factor. And that's not just immigrants. That's a lot of just old stock Canadians who got into the scheme, the housing market scheme, and are unwilling to let it fall.
Well, we also have this not in my backyard attitude, as they call NIMBY. Don't build affordable housing in my neighborhood. One thing else I should ask you too, since you're about the same age as I have.
Yep.
You talk about housing costs in Canada. Has something similar happened with college costs?
Oh yeah, college and university is insane. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up because this is one area where I'll actually give a full-throated defense to a lot of these immigrants that are coming here, in particular in Canada, and they're having to bickering over what numbers they're going to reduce them to, because I think we're up to 800,000 or 900,000 per year now in terms of foreign students that come to get educated in this country, and a lot of our universities are basically, they're already outstripped to the point where it's massively expensive, even for the domestic Canadians to get. But even for some of these immigrants, they're basically plundering these immigrants tremendously to even be able to come here and get these educations. The price of education, and I think this is actually one of those areas where I've talked about it in the past, but just not enough people seem interested in this. And hopefully someone else maybe is listening to this is willing to engage with me, because this is just one of those things where I just can't believe it even happens in this modern information age that we live in. If you explain to this, I don't know if you ever seen that video where the alien comes down to the earth and you try to explain stuff to him, how crazy it sounds. But if you explain to an alien that came down, you said, yeah, we live in this time where we literally have the breadth of human knowledge at our disposal, at our fingertips, where millions of people at a time, in real time, at a time, can have access to some of the greatest minds, the greatest literature, the greatest information, the greatest ideas ever told throughout human history. And yet we have to go to these bricks and mortar, old, antiquated institutions that are still teaching you basically the old Prussian model with a modern woke kind of progressive twist to it, I guess, in terms of how you get educated. And it's profoundly expensive when we live in the digital age where you can replicate, like even my young lad's girlfriend went to teacher's college to become a teacher. You're still spending thousands of dollars on books that could be easily reproduced and provided for pennies, you know what I mean, in PDF form, right? This, to me, this is just mind blowing. This is something along the lines or akin to living, in the modern, in 2024, but yet where I live, rather than jumping in, let's say I got a Corvette out there and I can be in town in 40 minutes. No, I'm just going to take my old horse or the old stall or whatever, like that. To me, it just seems unbelievable that we live in this modern age of information, that education has become so profoundly expensive. And the only reason why that is because the lack of competition in the market, and because government, once again, is the one that dictates that. And the minute government started, I seen that start to take off, and it's probably the same in the US too, is the minute the government started backstopping loans, government started backstopping loans was the minute you could almost see verbatim as the trajectory of the cost increases took off.
Yeah, that's so wild. Sorry. Yeah, it's I wondered about that. I often say that, and it's the prop. It seems to be the same thing. A lot of the things that we buy have gotten cheaper. I mean, TV sets are cheaper, microwave ovens, refrigerators. But the most expensive things we buy have all housing, your car, your healthcare, and college. Those four things have went up, and it's offset all of the gains we've made with the other stuff.
Yes. And actually, I firmly believe that was actually probably one of the major factors that got some of these figureheads in the G20 to agree to allow back in the day, to allow China to get into the international trade system is because they realized that was their only way. See, that was their ability. If you think about it from the Machiavellian mindset, then, is if you can offset a lot of those costs imposed on the citizens by having cheap imported goods, right, that are produced by basically slave labor, that will offset, because they know that every income, whether you're talking about a single family income or a single person income or a family income, they know there's a finite amount of income that comes into a household. If you can offset a lot of that by giving them, cheap disposable goods, well, then you can, once again, you can make up that difference by increasing the price of the domestic things that you provide, like you say. And once again, and those domestic things are the ones that are the most important thing, right? So the roof over your head, the food in your belly, like all these things. Well, I guess food
hasn't went up that much, but food's kind of a. The other thing I wanted to ask you too.
Yeah.
How long has Canada's dollar been fiat?
1917 is when our central bank. Well, no, that was when the income tax was introduced. So I guess that would be
about the same time as America. How lovely.
Yeah. Actually,
but our dollar was pegged to gold up until 1971. The American dollar was about $35 for 1 ounce of gold, or maybe well, maybe not. Maybe it wasn't that. Then after that, there was a boom in gold, and gold went up to about $800 an ounce. The 70s were a key time for all this.
Well, 1971, when Nixon took it off. Well, basically Canada, once Nixon took it, Canada has basically been riding on the U.S. dollar and they've pegged our dollar to the U.S. dollar for that specific reason.
There is one thing we need coins. We need a $1 coin and a $2 coin. We need a loonie and a toonie. Definitely. I mean, we should get rid of the $1 bills and just go back to having both coins. I don't know why Americans won't do that, but they're pretty much anyway. That's one thing I will get on my soapbox for.
Well, yeah, I would just like, even when we talk about coins, I would just like even our currency to actually be based on an actual tangible commodity that actually has intrinsic value. That was the whole point, whether you're talking about Canada, the US, or the UK, or any of these Western, especially the Anglosphere, was the whole point of our currencies. So when you were growing up, when you were young, just like when I was, although when we were growing up, we were at the latter stage. We were actually the beginning when this currency was really getting full fiat. But back in the day, in particular the 60s, all of our coinage was actual silver or copper, things that are actually, an actual finite resource that actually. But that's the thing. Now our money, none of it is actually it's funny you mentioned that, because I mentioned this is another way where I try to get young people in particular to think about the economy with more of an inquisitive mindset rather than trying to just finger wag at them and try to explain things. I don't think that works very well. But what I would do is, I was getting hired by a construction employer when I was up in Ontario. And just for a joke, because there was a bunch of young guys, they were all on lunch break at the time. They were all sitting around. And just for a joke, just to see what kind of reaction I would get, because he asked me how much he expecting in wages. And I think at that particular time, I think silver was going for roughly, I think it was $19.70 an ounce, I believe it was. Anyways, I said, just give me $5. I'll take $1.25 an hour, but the stipulation is it has to be paid in coinage that was minted prior to, I think it was 1966 is when they stopped minting anything in sterling silver or actual real silver, genuine silver.
It was something like that here too. The silver quarter was worth a quarter worth of silver at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually got the kind of response that I was hoping for from some of these young guys, who kind of looked at me quite strange. But that gave me that was where I dipped my toe in the water that gave me the ability to then further explain to them how much our money has been devalued and depreciated by the simple fact that those 5 coins, because the 5 coins would have equaled an ounce, that still retained its value. Now that $19 back in the day, they would have only been worth $1.25, but they actually retained value to the point, in contrast to the fiat currency, where they actually increased in value, right? And same with gold and such, which is why I try to explain to young people that there's a reason why things like these commodities were used, well, gold in particular, for 5,000 years continuously, is not just by the fact of its fungibility, the fact that you can, it's basically indestructible and stuff. But by simple fact that government doesn't have the ability, like you can't, there's no such thing as a government program where they go out and just magically invent gold or silver. Like that stuff has to be mined by actual human beings with resources, or well, I guess robots too, I guess. But there actually has to be capital and resources put to actual work to actually produce and provide these things, which actually not just gives them some part of the value, but the fact that they can also be used in multiple applications is another thing that gives them their intrinsic value. Whereas, the money that we have now, really, and you're probably aware of this too, the only value that it's truly worth is whatever the government says. And the only reason why that's the case is because they have a big military, right? Without the military, right? Without the American military backing the might of the dollar, well, we don't really know what the actual dollar would genuinely be worth today. But we do know at the very least, bare minimally, even with all that they've done, it's lost 96 or 97% of its purchasing power since 1913.
Something like that. It's certainly, it's definitely lost a lot of purchasing power.
Yeah, massive amount.
It's I don't know where we're going to go from here. That's why you should support crypto. I think that's the best solution at this point.
Well, that's the thing with yeah. Well, that's the thing with me with the crypto thing is I'm tacitly on board. I can see the underlying how the structure could definitely be used, but I'm also quite well aware and privy to a lot of past knowledge where if society gets to the point where it's broken down that far to the point where you actually have to resort to something like a cryptocurrency for your exchange and stuff, I think just because even if you go back to whether you're talking about the Netherlands with the tulips or even Britain, the tally stick, right? I think human beings are at least innovative enough that they will find a way to create something that will be a representation of value, right? So I don't believe we'd ever have to go back to full-on bartering, although agorism and bartering would still be part and parcel, just like it is today. Sometimes there is a guy that wants your apple and you want his orange, right? But for those multiple times where they don't, then there's always humans are very innovative and will find a way to try to exchange value in a manner that's going to be more conducive. That's the whole point of the market, right? The only reason why we're going to exchange voluntarily is if I acknowledge that I did good on my end of the bargain and you did good on your end. That's the whole win-win situation. So I don't know. Cryptocurrency would be good in some way, and it definitely has the ability with the fact that it's encrypted and stuff to skirt a lot of big government stuff. But I think at the end of the day, what government might very well end up do if they don't just make Bitcoin illegal entirely is same with end-to-end encryption. If they catch anything right at your point of transaction, so whatever device you're using, if there's a way for them to track that in some way, then I think, like I say, so I'm not against Bitcoin. I'm not against cryptocurrency. I have a little bit of it myself, mostly because I've been donated some of it over the years. But I would definitely suggest, and I'm not giving any financial advice, but for me personally, I little bit is fine, but I don't think I would be one of those people that just want to hedge entirely against fiat by going all in on the cryptocurrency, because I think that it can also be used just like a gun can be used for good and bad. I think crypto can also be used as to create yet another Ponzi scheme for a lot of people too, right?
That I can see most crypto is designed to be limited, so there can only be a certain amount of Bitcoins.
Yeah.
And then there are no more Bitcoins, so that's how it goes. It's and considering how easy it is to lose, the number of Bitcoins will naturally go down. And Bitcoin is divisible, of course. It's
Well, yeah. Even
like I said, people say, hey, I can't wait till Bitcoin goes to $1 million. I said, yeah, but if Bitcoin goes to $1 million, what's that going to mean?
Yeah, really. Yeah.
I mean, is a car going to cost me $100,000 then, or it's
yeah. Well, that's the problem. It was the same thing that people used to say. I remember when I was growing up and people would talk about the minimum wage. And I was, young and naive and ignorant to a lot of the economic knowledge that I'm privy to today. And I kind of fell for that nonsense too, where you think, oh, well, yeah, well, the government just keeps making things expensive, or this is so much more expensive, so we got to create a new floor by raising the minimum wage. But as I've watched throughout the course of my life, when I started working at 15 in 1985, minimum wage was around $4 an hour.
Yeah.
It's like 5 times that now. But if you were working for minimum wage today, I think you actually have less purchasing power because of all the costs that have increased as a reflection of those speculative increases. You basically, it's just like a lot of the Austrian economists tell you, the people that get the money early on, they're the ones that get to have maintained that purchasing power. By the time it trickles down in terms of your minimum wage increases and stuff, and it starts to get reflected in all the price increases, because that's always what takes place is they increase the minimum wage, but then that also gives crony corporations or big government the ability to start increasing the prices on everything else to reflect that increase. So it's like the proverbial dog chasing his tail forever, right? You're never really getting any further ahead, which is why I think the one thing that I will say, once again, I don't give financial advice, but the things that I have seen, the staples, and because of the way they're mined, extracted, and the kind of productive resources that go into it, are tangible commodities. And once again, I acknowledge as well that those tangible commodities will have serve some purpose or use, just like Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, if you're starving and there's nobody around to trade your gold with, well, it's not going to fill your belly, or not in a way that'll give you calories, anyways.
Yeah, well, one thing I've noticed, for example, in 1964 in America, the minimum wage was $1.25 per hour, and that was when the quarters were made of silver.
Right.
So those quarters, those 5 silver quarters would be worth about 17, would be worth a lot more today. It's
for sure. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. By the way, with it becoming spring, I always want to tell people, I've done this for some of my cousins. A great graduation gift is a 1 ounce silver coin. I sent that to a couple of my nephews. Says, here, happy graduation. Here's your present. Don't just give them money, but I gave them that kind of gets them thinking about things. And of course, if they don't want the silver, they can always go sell it. But it's
yeah.
I think it's a great idea. Give your kids, give them an 1 ounce silver coin. So
yes, no, I think that's a great idea, because it does, like I say, they're great conversation pieces, and it gets people to actually think about things a little bit more in terms of what money is, because that's another major problem that I see with the education system today, and the fact that we live in the information age. I mean, yes, it took me a little bit of while, right? But if you think about the amount of years that people put into their educating their sons or daughters, by the time you come out of a education institution, even before you get into post-secondary, I mean, bare minimally, why? I mean, just goes to show it has to be structured to be this way, because at bare minimum, you should have people coming out of 12, 13 years of education, a formal education, with at least a baseline knowledge in terms of what money even is, or how the monetary system works, or currency. But they're not getting any of that. Now they're being told all kinds of things in terms of the color of their skin color, whether that's good or bad, or what's between their legs, all stuff like that. But they're not getting the actual genuine baseline knowledge that I think would create a genuine society. Well, that was the thing that, even if you think about it, if you go all the way back to the original concept of democracy under ancient Greece, the only reason why those people at the time even believed that democracy, and these arguments were bantered back and forth, whether you're talking about Aristotle or Socrates or Plato, the only reason why any of them believed at the time that a democracy was a good idea is if you have a properly well-informed society. Every one of them, if they were alive today, would tell you the exact same thing, which is, no, democracy would be terrible if you have people that don't know how to think critically about the world around them. That's where you devolve into, a kind of entrenched slavery that no other tyrannical regime in the past could ever achieve.
I think there's a lot of factors involved, but for example, the legislature in the state of New Hampshire, one legislator represents less than 4,000 people.
Yeah.
The American Congress, one congressperson represents about 800,000. That's a huge difference in New Hampshire. But there's also, they certainly designed it for a literate population. I mean, at the time of the Revolutionary War, a lot of voters were, you had to own land, or you had to have you had to be a soldier. I don't know. I'd probably advocate nowadays that if you want to vote, you have to either prove you've paid property tax or paid income tax.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And I'm not even a fan of the voting or the state, but I would definitely agree with you. If you are going to have something like that, like a system of governance where you have a state, this monopoly of violence, yes, at bare minimum, people have to have some kind of skin in the game of some sort. I mean, this is the thing that drives me nuts is if we talk about these kind of things at the personal level without bringing the state involved, you'd be able to have almost universal acceptance of the kind of things that we say, no matter who we're talking to, right? If we left politics out of the equation and just used a metaphor or a scenario that wasn't involved in the state, but talked about these same kind of baseline principles and understanding of knowledge and stuff, almost everyone without exception would agree with this. That's the crazy part, though, is the minute you bring the state into it, that's the crazy thing that entity has the capacity, right, to completely unwind what should be just common baseline knowledge that we humans possess, right? And we can understand even when we're small children, and somehow makes us. That's why I firmly believe, which a lot of libertarians say and point out, which is that the state, the way it's presented, it truly is a cult or a religion, because only in a cult like mindset or in a religious type mindset does the average human being have the capacity to completely forget about all that real world knowledge that they've been predisposed to, and they grew up with that real world knowledge the whole life, and wipe it out of their head entirely because my state, because my roads, right? It just seems so strange that people are so willing to forego the things that they know are the best real world practices in their life. Like even in terms of the NAP, people will
Yeah.
constantly, oh, you need the state for this, you need the state. Well, how many times in your life where you've wanted something did you think that it was okay or legitimate for you to just go do it yourself without, being
Yeah.
moral or any moral or ethical implications,
Yeah.
right? Nobody would actually own up to that. I'm not saying there aren't people that don't think that way, but most people would never own up to that at the personal level. That the minute you introduce the state, all those morals, all those principles, they completely go out the window, which is once again, you just have to know that that has to be one of the main functions of the education system, is to make people predisposed to having that kind of a cult-like mindset, because it has worked very effective. Whether it was by happen chance, although I don't think, or by design, that is what we've ended up with. We live in the modern age of information with so much accumulated knowledge at our disposal, but the overwhelming majority of our fellow peers and citizens are dumbed down to the point where they don't even understand basic concepts.
Yeah. It's I don't know where we go from here. It seems like it's a really tough dilemma we have. I like to think that Javier Milei may provide a blueprint for us to save the world, but
Yeah.
and I think if he saves his own country, and maybe I'll just go down there. It's a lovely place. I don't know how much you've traveled.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm glad you brought up Millie, actually, because one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, and I've been talking about people, and this is where I like to talk to people, especially that maybe had prior leanings to the left, because they seem to be the ones that are more in the cultural mind space, because they're the ones that typically are the ones that
Oh
are
yeah,
into arts and entertainment, right? And I will just say this. So there's the old argument that Breitbart made, which was that politics is downstream of culture. And I 100% agree with that. But the one thing where I keep thinking about when you talk about whether you're talking about your Elon Musk, let's say, or your Javier Milei as in terms of running for elections, is that is also a part of our culture. So that it's still applicable that culture is the driving force and politics is downstream to it. But Javier Milei is himself his own personality, and his personality kind of leans more to being predisposed to being that arts and entertainment type of guy. So he can, and that's the part where I would say there's actually a kind of emergence there where the culture and politics can kind of play that role simultaneously. So you can have someone like Javier Milei who's using his personality and those kind of cultural undertones to drive politics.
he was the singer in a Rolling Stone cover band,
Right.
and
Exactly.
I don't, and I'm thinking a lot about this. But if we ever want to get libertarian success, maybe we need to get more rock singers out there.
Yes, or at least people that have that kind.
I think the important thing is that he went out.
Mm-hmm.
He went out and made himself cool, and so by being cool, when people see you as cool, you can say things that are you can get away with saying things that are kind of shocking. You can do a lot of things, and he's really captured the people. He got a lot of youth vote. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know who Canada has that would be like this. I don't know. I don't know if necessarily anybody in America is necessarily like this. I mean, as far as the vibe and the way he
Mm.
delivers himself, it's
Yeah.
really it's really interesting. But
Yeah.
there's a I really look at him and just say to myself, you know, why we've worked so hard in America and we've not
Mm.
made much of a difference, but then this guy's made a huge difference already. It's very interesting. I don't think it's just because things in Argentina got so bad, but you being about the same age as I have,
Mm.
when the Berlin Wall came down, I didn't think we'd still be fighting these communists
Yeah,
in
really.
2024. I think, okay, the debate's over, but no, and a lot of this, as one of my associates has pointed out, a lot of this stuff really is. There really still are going after capitalism. I mean, like when they say whiteness, they really do mean capitalism.
Yep. Yep.
It's just a code word. They're just figuring out a more subversive way to fight it.
Yeah, which to me
It's
it's
kind of
so
crazy.
great. Well, it's crazy to me what I don't understand about the ones that are full on, and I think these are the ones once again are the useful idiots, not the. I think
Yes.
I think the biggest figureheads in terms of the collectivists actually they themselves are not anti-capitalist by any stretch because I think the wisest among them, the more Machiavellians among them, recognize that once again you need the underlying structure of capitalism to produce
Yeah.
and provide the wealth for you to
Yeah.
steal because without that yeah like socialism without the productive classes yeah well you know that
Yes.
devolves down into really really quick and that doesn't take long but yeah your Have Millier like when you mention him he is a definitely unique individual because I've thought about this many times before and the situation that we find ourselves in today is and especially when you're talking about libertarians in particular and I'll even put myself a little bit on that spectrum is I wouldn't say autistic per se, but just their typical the kind of personality traits that they typically possess, and a lot of them do seem to be predominantly, maybe I don't know what you would want to call maybe a little bit more anal retentive in certain ways. I just don't think that they are that kind of personality
There's a
that
lot of things. I mean, some of the people are just plain they're good people, but they're boring.
yes, yes,
It's
yeah,
Milei's figured it out, and I don't know how you make more Mileis, but I think that's what you need to
that's the
do.
thing. That's the
It's you
thing.
know it's and I don't know how that applies. And he's definitely making a difference. I saw his book in the airport in Peru, so that's I yeah, it's really amazing to see this happen.
Yeah.
I think the fall of socialism was important, but now you're kind of seeing the rise of capitalism. People might exaggerate. I said this is the most important election in the history of the world.
Mm.
It's yeah, he's
Yeah. Well, that's
you
what
know
I mean. I don't know how many of those personalities we have because
yeah
even someone like myself, I will just say, like, I can't even imagine myself. I don't even know if I could force myself into. I have absolutely no ambition or aspire to be in charge of millions of people's lives, right? Arbitrarily, and I don't know what it would take. Even if I thought I had the competence and the skills or the ability in order to do so, I don't even know what it would take to ever entice me. So yeah, people like your Javier Emilia, he's definitely a one in a million, or could possibly be a one in a billion because he has the ability, he has the character, he has the charisma, he has the wherewithal, he has the courage, right, of his conviction. He does, like you say, he brings the entertainment factor to it. And he's actually very, very knowledgeable. Very early on when I even learned about this guy, didn't take me long to hear the kind of things that he was quoting. Is like this guy is very, very well versed, right? You'd find very few people, even in our cultures, that would be as well versed in the kind of not just Austrian economics, but free markets and capitalism and social policy, the non-aggression, all that stuff. He just seems to exude, that libertarian, but with that more natural tendency or that personality trait that would put him, I would say, more closely aligned with people on the left that once again are carry much more favor in society because those are the ones that usually do drive the culture.
yeah it's very interesting. I think you can run for office and engage in a philosophical real education. I think that's what's important.
Mm.
It'll be very very and hopefully have impact around South America because
Yeah.
I think
Oh,
South America I think South America could save the West. Uh,
good.
well, they seem like they still. It's first of all, everybody in South America, they're colonized by the Spanish. They all go
Yeah.
back to the Roman. They all go back to the Roman Empire. If
Yeah.
you go back to the Roman Empire, if your
Spanish or
culture goes
Portuguese.
back to the Roman Empire, you're part of the West.
Yeah.
Secondly, I still see in a lot of South America, although they got to work hard to protect this, a culture of family is important, where family is valued.
Yeah.
Canada and the U.S. has completely thrown that out the door.
Yeah.
With divorce and false accusations against innocent men.
Yeah.
I think they're at a very critical place where they could go the wrong way, but I see a lot more hope there just because the attitudes of the women there. They seem to like men, and in America they don't.
Yeah.
I've heard Canada's worse, but who knows?
Oh yeah,
There's a
it's
lot of the
rough.
same influence, but if and so it's going to be very interesting. Yeah, so we'll have to watch what happens. And but whatever happens, I think there's a lot to be learned from Milei. We need to copy him. And
Yeah.
after visiting there last November, I have more confidence in El Salvador.
Oh really? Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe I don't necessarily like that. I hope that all of these people that Bukele rounded up get proper due process and get their day in court,
Mm.
and get cleaning up the crime. But that's great. But you gotta. But it definitely seemed like there was still very much a family culture there, and
Yeah.
I hope they do well. I think they'll do very well. And I heard Bukele speak, and he seems like he, whatever. What I still don't know about, but whatever I can say about Bukele is he seems like a guy who really does care about his country, and I think that's important because I don't think a lot of these politicians care about their countries at all.
Well,
I never asked you who's Justin's daddy.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't know. I know a lot of people like to say Fidel, right? But I don't listen.
There's a lot of theories on this, but yeah.
Well, that's the thing. In the absence of any, to me, this kind of stuff I find is just so. Like, why would you even want to concern yourself? Like, this is an area where there's so many real world conspiracies that why the fuck do you even have to delve into? To me, that's the weirdest part. I don't get why people get, but some people I guess are predisposed.
Yeah,
but they just always want to. It's like they got to get a fill of that kind of stuff on a daily basis.
I think there's a laziness, and sometimes I think they just don't want to engage in the hard work that ideological battles take.
Yeah,
it doesn't change whether his bad policies are still going to be bad policies either way.
Yeah,
but sometimes people just like to engage in that kind of gossip. It's especially because it involves sex. It's the same thing. About Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings.
Well, but see,
that's one. That's one thing you guys did right. You guys never had slavery up there. Good for you.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing for sure. Although,
that is a good thing.
I would say, well, we never had actual human ownership. It's just we jumped straight to the newest version of slavery, which we don't call it that. We call it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you treated the indigenous as badly as we did down here, but.
Well, that's the thing. Some of the people in the past, there was definitely some things that happened. But once again, to me, when it comes to stuff like that. And once again, I mentioned earlier on, as someone who's Irish and Scottish, I've never, not even for my own personal mental health, and I tell this to people all the time, and even First Nation people that I know, is don't fall for that fucking, yes, bad things have happened to a lot of people through countless generations and centuries and millennia in the past. But if you take it upon yourself to put that burden in your own mind, right, to create yourself to be a victim, then you're giving your opponents, the very people that you oppose, you're giving them a leg up, and they're living in your head rent free. To me, I would never, like I say, it would be easy, right? Especially in this modern victim cult, it would be easy for me to say, hey, I'm Irish background. Oh, my whole fucking generations of people were enslaved by the British for, countless, generations. Yeah. But that. First of all, I would never want to put myself in that mindset. I think it's be completely destructive to any self-esteem at all. But it also, I would not want to actually bring that to my kids. Like my sons, I have two sons that are 32 and 29, And I can't imagine raising them to want to think of themselves as perpetual victims, where it seems like there's basically they're helpless
Yes.
and their hands are always tied behind the back.
Yes.
To me, that's a terrible setup for anybody. That's a terrible, terrible thing to tell
Yeah.
people.
Seeing yourself as a perpetual victim, it's not a good thing, And
No.
did your parents come over in the 1840s?
Well, my family come all the way back to, I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, they were some of the early settlers that obviously Nova Scotia and then New Brunswick.
But
That's the
I was
Irish.
referring to the 1840s, the awful potato famine, which was, of
Oh,
course,
yeah. No, I believe it was actually even before that. But yeah, it was definitely, like I say, and it's funny how it actually works out, because it's my mother's side of the family that's all Scottish, and my father's side it's all Irish. So it's quite a mixture there. A lot of people, it's kind of a working joke around here.
yeah,
With
you
with,
have a little bit of Scottish in you, I can tell. Yeah, it's
yeah,
just
yeah,
the way you
yeah.
talk.
I could be a cheap drunk, but but actually, tell you the truth, I don't even drink alcohol anymore. So there's that. But
Yeah,
but
yeah. I got to visit Ireland, Southern Ireland last year. It is absolutely beautiful there.
yeah,
Yeah, I really, I really hope, I really hoping Britain can figure it out, because Britain is
yeah,
arguably the greatest, been really, I think, just because they've been around longer, really one of the greatest countries in the history of the world. And I just don't,
yeah,
I would hate to see Britain go bad. I hope Britain can figure it out. I mean,
yeah.
they've
I'm the same way,
the
actually.
tradition of liberalism to come out of there, and all the great accomplishments. I mean, it's just,
Oh yeah. Well,
they've done some bad things, but but they didn't do anything bad things that other people didn't do. And
yeah,
but some of the good that's come out of Britain, I really hope that they can
for sure,
figure it out and just be Britain again, and
for sure. Well, that's the thing where
be the country of Locke and Sydney and
yeah,
Milton
yeah.
and the other Enlightenment. Maybe we can have, maybe Miele is the start of the new Enlightenment. I hope so.
Well, all it takes, that's the beautiful thing, is all it takes when, and I say this to people all the time when they say, well, what can one man, I'm just one man. Well, what can I can do? I always point out, I'm not 100% sure on everything that you're capable of, but never underestimate what one person can do. And then I'll usually point to countless examples of that. I mean, just one that I like to use nowadays in as just because it's so great, not just for the whole free market idea or capitalism, or the fact that you don't need government, is Elon Musk is a perfect example that if you say, to someone that, just 40 years ago, if you said to someone that, you a private business could send ships into space, and not only do it, but do it in the most seamless, less expensive, a matter of fact, environmentally friendly, even if you want to go that way, right?
Yeah.
With Elon, because of the way he's doing it, that's the power of the market. That's the power. Now, I get there's a little bit of, because of government regulation.
I like Elon, but you got to admit he's kind of subsidized. Not to mention he's made some.
Oh, yeah.
He's also made some absolutely horrible decisions with regard to women. But yeah,
right.
It's not.
Well, what I look at it is even not just this business in terms of getting people into space, but that at least tells people they can't at least use the argument no more. Well, you need government for X, right? So that at least it destroys that argument. But the other thing is, while all the other social media platforms have been, and I've suffered at the hands of these platforms, have greatly suppressed and silenced my content. But here's that one man, once again, who took all that wealth that he built up, right, and actually invested $44 billion just to make sure that we at least had one platform. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There's days where I think I'm still probably suppressed to a degree, but I don't think it's because of anything Elon Musk is doing. It's just that you're talking about a business with probably thousands of people. So stuff's going to happen regardless. But
yeah,
I will say that there's one man, that there's just two examples where one man can really make a large difference. And it's not just what he can do himself. Just like with Miele, it's what he can inspire in others. And one thing I will say, I'm not as knowledgeable in the female department as a man myself, but I will say what I've known my whole life, and being someone that comes from a competitive background myself, is that is one of the greatest things that gets people's, especially men in particular, out of their quagmire and inspired to do things, is to see someone that they want to be competitive with and see if they can't achieve or attain even
Yeah.
more success than them. So yeah, Milei might very well, who knows, maybe the next figurehead that might end up running for prime minister of Canada, or maybe someone in the future in the United States or somewhere, may very well get inspired by Javier Milei and see that he's actually, proven to be at least somewhat successful. And that is all it takes. And really, once you get that kind of inspiration, then it can permeate through the culture rather quickly.
Yes, and there's also very much I'm discovering that there's also a great Spanish liberal tradition that we don't really study much, but it's there. I think Musk had the benefit of watching also his home country go completely down the tubes once it went woke. Speaking of single men, I got to ask you, what do you think about the Tates?
Oh, the Tate brothers?
Yes.
There's some areas that, well, my oldest son, he was quite into the Andrew Tate there for a while. And there's definitely some aspects of it. So I listened to the guy for a bunch of shows actually with my son. And there's some of the stuff he says, which is just absolutely great. Just, I would be saying the same things to my sons. And I guess that's probably why it even resonated with them. But there's other areas though, too, where, but of course I'm an older guy. I've been with my wife for 30 some years, but I've never even when I was younger, I've never really been a big fan into the whole player kind of a culture. I guess that's probably more predisposed for that because my mom and my dad separated when I was a kid. I was surrounded by not just my mother, but a lot of women for most of my life. So I got to see both sides of that thing. And as a man, and of course, when I was younger, I wasn't nearly as compassionate or thinking about these things as I am now, but yeah, I don't like the idea of men just treating women like as just pure sexual objects or I think that is a little bit beneath most men, and I don't think that's the most conducive way for us as human beings to get along. But like I say, for the few things that he says that I definitely would disagree with, I think he definitely counters enough of it with some good. And I think especially in recent years, in particular last year or so, because of all the crap that's been happening to, I think he's gotten himself a little bit more in check and is doing a lot better, at least. So at least if he's going to be influenced, sorry, go ahead.
The first quality of Tate I've noticed is that he's and I granted he probably makes some of them up, but he's still a very good storyteller.
Oh,
he's got really good stories, and his stories are usually powerful life lessons in them.
Yeah,
I think also, because he's it's interesting too that his father was actually a well-respected chess master, so he kind of sees things and looks at things in a certain way. I hope I think he can. It'll be interesting because I respect mostly the men who have been married. Men who have been married a long time to one woman. I think are the men worth listening to because you've been married long enough. You've how long?
34 years.
Yeah, you've been married 34 years. Even though you may have gotten lucky, you've probably figured some things out. Most men are just going through blind, and they have no idea why they're successful or why they fail.
Right.
And the other guy I listen to, that was a guy who sleeps with whoever he wants because he's obviously figured something out.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's necessarily the way to go either. I'm never going to feel like I need to buy an expensive car, but I also think he's maybe, fighting. I think he's also a logical response to a lot of the things that have happened in this country, in particular I said, every time a man gets a false accusation, Tate gets another follow.
Well, that's the part that I find so utterly disturbing when it comes to these people, especially the most active and vocal voices on the left, is they are the representative voice for people on the left these days are so far to the left that everything, and I've heard other people use this expression too, everything right of Mao, right, is considered far right. So Andrew Tate, to be honest with you, growing up in the 70s and 80s, right, the kind of stuff that Andrew Tate was saying, I mean, I remember even a comedian, Andrew Dice Clay, saying a whole lot worse, right?
Yeah.
Right? So
they're worried because young men are listening to Tate. That's why they're worried because teenage boys love Tate, which I can understand. There's a bravado there, too. And I think if they, it's And I think that's the thing, he seems to understand, that life is not about playing it safe.
Yes.
He says, I want to die on the field of battle. And maybe that's a little exaggeration, but
Yeah.
yeah, in some ways that's kind of how we're supposed to live. We lived this life
Yeah.
for years where we're always where we'd have to go fight for our survival every day.
Yeah.
We might have to fight off a grizzly bear, or fight off a lion or something.
Oh yeah.
And we learned those things, and we've maybe kind of gotten soft since we got removed from that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I
You know,
believe that actually things would be a whole lot different if we men in particular in the West were not already predisposed to having so many distractions or vices rather than confronting life straight head on. I think the world
yeah,
would be a profoundly different place today, right? The like people like to say, "Oh, men just aren't men these days." But once again, I think a lot of it is just they're given too many avenues of escape or means to dull their senses, so they're not actually
yeah.
having to confront the real world.
Well,
Whereas I think you would see that men, it's still within men to be men. It's just that it needs to be subtly pulled out of them.
well,
What I mean?
I don't know if it's happening in Canada, but it's definitely happening in America. And last Saturday I saw this sign in the library, and it said something like, for the safety of your children, children under the age of 10 are not allowed alone in the library. Now, I can remember growing up,
Hmm.
I would go to the library by myself probably when I was 7 years old. And,
Oh yeah.
you have this culture now where you're extending childhood,
Yep.
not letting children do things,
Yep.
not letting, granted, kids might get hurt, you know, I knew lots of kids, who might climb the tree and end up breaking their arm or something like that. That's just part of growing up. But,
Yeah.
I want kids to be able to climb trees.
Yeah.
I want kids to be able to go off a 10-foot diving board at the swimming pool. You can't find
Yeah.
those at swimming pools anymore because diving
Yeah.
boards are dangerous.
Yeah.
You've created this ridiculous culture where everything has to be safe, and you're not
Yeah.
teaching kids aren't learning to navigate risk or navigate or just live life.
Yeah.
Another thing too is, another thing too is I can remember, maybe I was 7 or 8 years old too. My mother would give me money and say, here, go over to the post office and buy some stamps. Or she
Yeah.
might hand me mail and said, mail. And sometimes it might've been packed little package of stuff. Go mail these and pay for it,
Yep.
So I'd go to the post office and do that kind of stuff. Cause I was about 5 minutes away from both of those. So it wasn't that big a
Yeah.
deal, but you let kids do things and let kids, I don't know if Canada's as bad as America, but I can go down to Peru and I can see kids in canoes by themselves at 6 or 7 years old on big rivers, and they're
Yeah.
operating these canoes, and they're learning how to live life, and they're not wearing life jackets.
Exactly.
It's
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because to tell you the truth, as a Gen Xer, and I think that's somewhere we're definitely going to share a lot of agreements, and this is where Gen Xers are. And I've actually got my own little meme that I share periodically from time to time, where basically I believe that Gen Xers, this is one area where I think we're at the right. I think based on the culture of the time frame that we grew up in, I believe the kind of knowledge that we were privy to, the fact that we still are old enough to be knowledgeable of what our parents and grandparents like they went through the depression eras, and yet we're
yes,
still young. We're still young enough to kind of still perceive how it is to be a young person today. Too, I think we're in that perfect. I think we're in that Goldilocks zone. Whereas Gen Xers, we have to be the ones who are, and I call us the leaders of liberty in the 21st century. I believe that is the mantle. I think that's not, I'm not saying it's by design, but just because of the whole, how generations work, and how the hard men make, difficult times and all that. I think we
yes,
are. I think we are at that point, and I think this is why I see this time and time again. So whether it's you or Tim Moen or Elon Musk or anyone else that I talk to, predominantly, it is a lot of fellow Gen Xers because we are predisposed to having that, not just the live, let live mentality, but like you say, we got the benefit. I think we were the last
yes,
generation in whole that had the benefit of unstructured play. And you know what? If as an adult male today, I'll tell you, out of all the things I learned whether it's in school,
Yes.
from the family, whether it's from the church. When I was taken when I was a kid, some of the best knowledge I ever attained in my entire life, and I call them street smarts, is just
Yeah.
what I learned from that unstructured play, because there was
Yeah.
no authority. There was no authority around. It was to tell us you have to do this. If we had 10 people out there and we were playing cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians or whatever the hell we were doing, or tag or whatever it was, we all had to figure
Yeah.
out in real time. We all functioned under anarchy is what we did.
Yeah.
We grew up in a pure state of anarchy, which is why a lot of us are predisposed to be fine with minimum or no government, because we never needed the constant supervision or structure
Yeah.
or authority. All we needed was to understand baseline rules and to make sure that we were willing to horizontally enforce those rules on each other. So when I was a kid, you're probably the same way. Even if there was that one in a blue moon, and they do exist, even if there was that one in a thousand asshole that would beat up the guy even after he's on the ground, there was always the rest of the guys in the playground or wherever this fight was happening. They would say, "Hey, no, that guy's you beat him, he's down. Now fuck
Yeah.
off, or I'll kick your." That was, and that no supervision,
Yeah.
no cop, no principal, no teacher, nobody had to come out to do that. It's just that we knew how to do things. We knew how to function on the fly. We weren't scared of our shadows, and we horizontally enforced the kind of rules that we thought were conducive with, having good socialized play. And that to me is,
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of thing that we have to carry forward, not just in our own lives, but to bring it. And now I've obviously taught my own sons to be like that, and they're great representations of that mindset. But I fear that there's so many other parents in particular. Well, let me point this out, and I know I'm a bit long-winded here, but this is something that I've thought about a long time. So I was raised in that way, but then you have parents that were those were my parents, and the people that when I was growing up with were baby boomers, but they had their kids very young in a normal timeline, so in their teens or their early 20s. Now, the difference that I seen, and it was glaringly obvious even when I was younger, but even more so as an adult, is the boomers that were the professional class that went into, especially the mothers that went into professional positions, did have their kids till in their 30s or 40s. What a complete difference, because they have kids just like my kids are millennials. But I know baby boomers who have kids that are the same age as my millennials.
Yes.
What a massive difference in how they are, how they perceive the world. They're fearful of everything, unwilling to take risks. I mean, they were, and what it is, and I firmly believe, that's me psychoanalyzing this stuff, but I firmly believe is because as people get older, they become much, much too structured. And then if you have too much of a structured environment with your children, then your children never develop beyond adolescence with a full adult mindset. They still live somewhat adolescently in their mind in terms of how they perceive the world. And I think that's what a lot of whether you're talking about the older boomers that had their kids and had too much top-down structure when they were raising them and did them when they were much older and more rigid in their life, or some of the younger ones today who are the millennials who were raised by those people who are susceptible to this kind of, overly protective mindset of around in every corner and stuff. I see that those are the ones that are more susceptible to allow. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense that of course they're going to accept big government because they've been taught their whole life that they need some authority to constantly tell them what to do their whole life. And they're forever stuck in that loop. Anyways, that's kind of my rant on that one. So.
Yeah. I would just say, have your kids watch Leave It to Beaver or some other sitcom from that area, black and white.
Yeah,
or even go back and watch The Little Rascals. It was a different world. It really was. I could see it unraveling even when we started to grow up, because it was always this, culture of safetyism, where they couldn't go down the big diving boards and stuff, go down the big sliding board, stuff like that. It was
right.
It's
right.
So
well,
I hope
listen,
I hope we can get out of this. But yeah, it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, actually, I was just going to say, because I didn't want to keep you going too long. I see we're at the 2 hour and 30-minute mark already. But I actually, like I say, we kind of did get a little veer off track. But I don't mind that at all, because, like I say, I usually typically just want to. I just thoroughly enjoy engaging in dialogue and discussion with people. And like I said, I don't even care if people want to challenge me in any way, because I'm comfortable enough in my own moral and ethical stances on things that even if there's some area where I may have the wrong perception, or where I'm wrong in some way, be honest with you, I'd rather find out and hopefully correct that rather than continue to do. That's actually what has gotten me to the place I am today, is being willing. Like I said earlier on, I was raised in a religious family. Now I've had to fight through a lot of the dogma, right? But there are some areas of that religion that I still hold near and dear to my heart. Some of the great teachings of the Bible, I think, were great stories that that give some good, firm grasp or understanding how humans should cohabitate and cooperate with each other. I think there's some great stories there, but at least I've broken my mind out of the dogma so that I can think more critically about issues rather than just based on mysticism. But the same has also happened in terms of government. So I've had to break through basically two religious paradigms: the religion that I was predominantly predisposed to as a young man, but even more so as an adult, in terms of the state and people's belief in government. So I've had to break my mind free from a lot of that. And it was difficult, like, especially when you're the one in, like, say, 100 people. I've always accepted, and I've said it to my wife a few times. Do you know how easy it would be to go back to my old ignorant self? And I understand the saying now very much. It's very fresh in my mind when I think about ignorance is bliss, and it truly can be. Because if the only kind of thinking that you're doing is just baseline ground level, where you're just, talking to the next person about, nothing of any substance, or just things that you can find common agreement on and stuff, then it seems good in theory. But once again, once you see that play out for a long enough time, where nobody's ever actively engaging or discussing things that are really, really pressing and important that affect every aspect of our life. So when you're talking about politics or religion, right? As a kid, I was always told never to talk about that. But in reality, what we should have been told is to figure out ways, and I've seen this meme get shared around too, is actually to have these kind of hard discussions. Actually, maybe we would be in a little bit better position today if people were more willing to have those discussions rather than to keep brush them underneath the carpet. Because then I think we've accumulated to the point now where we've got a great big giant mountain of madness, and nobody knows even where to begin to start to clean it up, because it's been brushed under the carpet for so long, and these conversations and this kind of dialogue has been so void and vacant in the space that people don't even know where to begin. But I'm very thankful, like I say, to always have the opportunity to talk with people like you, so that we can lead by example. If there's one thing I can say, and you'll say, and there's a lot of people like us out there in the world, is we'll always be able to say that, I don't know how it's going to play out, right? I don't have a magic wand. I don't have a crystal ball, but I will always say, and I'll be able to sleep very well at night knowing that I've at least actively tried and participated many times in my life to try to talk about these big ideas and what it is to be a free human being. And that, if we can at least get more and more people doing that, like I say, I think that is the baseline. And I'm seeing that's taking place. But what I'm seeing today is those of us who are willing to engage with good, honest, good faith dialogue or conversation are now even being kind of pushed to the proverbial back of the bus for more proponents who used to be, or a lot of them used to, or seemed to be, that they were going to be anti-establishment figures or characters, but still playing the left-right game, and that, I think, is once again that kind of binary, that kind of destructive, divisive, or divide and conquer routine, I think, is at the heart and core of why society is not just down to the point where it is today, but unwilling to engage. It's much too easy for people to now function in their echo chambers rather than engage in these really difficult topics or discussions. And once again, but they need to take place. Sorry, I know I went a bit of a
Yeah,
rant
I
there again.
definitely think so. I hope we can get more conversations going on like this. We need them. I'm worried about how the way our conversations are broken down. Podcasting might be the fix for it, especially when you get together to talk about things like this. Well, yeah.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
Well, I don't have anything else left to say at this point. I don't know if you do, but I feel
Oh,
like it's
is
probably
there
a good time to
anything?
shut.
Well, once again, Chris, I do want to just say, like, I'm very
Yeah.
thankful for you engaging with me on X, and like I say, hopefully we've both clarified our positions enough for each other that I think we both realize that
Yeah.
neither of us are against immigration. What we're both against, and I think we've both agreed to that, is the fact that the government has just created a complete mess of everything and is literally pitting people against
Yes.
each other, which is the worst thing that
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
happen.
I have a novel called Escape from the Village, which is on all the sites. You can go to escapevillage.com.
Okay.
I've got a Substack at fountainheadforum.substack.com, although I've not been active lately. And of course, my show is on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, and BitChute. Probably be on more stuff soon. We've done about 162 episodes. I've had Tim Moen on. I had Chris Harrigan on also to talk about the trucker convoy. He's another good Canadian from New Brunswick.
Yeah, right on.
You know who that is? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you? I'm just curious. I'm just curious. Does your YouTube channel, is that on your? Because I'll actually check that out. Is it on your Twitter profile? Is it embedded in your bio?
I think it is. I might need to update that, but yeah, I'm on.
Well,
I've got my personal Twitter and my home Twitter and my account Twitter. So.
Okay. If it's not, if you wouldn't mind, can you just send me the link in a subsequent message then, so that I can check it out? But anyways, like I said, Chris, I really appreciate us having this conversation. And if there's any time in the future, if there's any time when you want to talk about anything and you maybe want a Canadian perspective, and maybe Tim's busy or anyone else, then like I say, just keep my name on file, and I'll be glad to engage in any kind of discussion you'd like to.
And still hope we can get Jamie Soleil on. Yeah. So.
Right on.
She's been great during the COVID stuff, and she's still pretty cute. So,
no, that's awesome.
I've known a few other good Canadians. A lot of the people who were in Ayn Rand's inner circle at the beginning were actually Canadians.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she had a lot of them. The Brandons were, and some of their friends. So.
Nathaniel Brandon, was he from a Canadian family?
Yeah, they were. A lot of them were from around Winnipeg.
Oh, okay, yeah, right on.
Yeah, it was kind of funny how that worked out. Yeah, it's a.
Yes, sir. Right on.
So I may make it back to Canada in May for the Capitalism and Morality Conference. That's over in Vancouver. I've not been to Canada in forever, but we'll see what happens. It's
right on.
It's a beautiful country, so yeah.
Yeah, no, that's pretty good. And just like with American, that's the thing. We got to try to at least keep these places, a lot of hard work, sweat, tears, and effort went into even just creating. Now, nothing was perfect, of course, but just to create even the kind of at least somewhat baseline understanding of what it is to be a free human being. Like I say, I don't even want to rest on the laurels of the figureheads of the past. I, just like you, would like to actually expand upon that kind of knowledge. And I mean, by sheer fact that we live in the information age, I've kind of even coined my own particular phrase. The fact that we do live in the information age is, let's consider this Enlightenment era 2.0, right? Why take advantage? Yeah, why take advantage of the fact of just even getting back to what some of the founding fathers said? How about we do them an even better service and actually expand upon that, right? And make it even more rigid and understood in terms of one thing I will say about in Canada is, and I'll tie it up, is if even my fellow Canadians just knew what rights meant in terms of inherent and inalienable, you guys at least know the term inherent and inalienable down there. But a lot of Canadians up here sadly believe that the rights come from government.
Well, we also still have our guns too. So
that's
So, okay. Well, thank you very much. And have a good
day.
On.
Okay. You too, Chris. Bye-bye. Have a good one. And I'll link anything you leave in the message. I'll link up for you in the bottom of the description of the video as well too.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a good one, my friend. Okay.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that was a great conversation. I appreciate all you folks that did show up to the debate. Although, as you realize, this wasn't too much of a debate, and I wasn't sure, but I didn't think it would be too much of a debate, anyways. Because usually people that come from the libertarian or objectivist mindset or philosophy, typically don't have too many major arguments or disagreements. At least once you sort through what you're actually thinking, right? And I think that's really all that needed to take place between us today, between me and Chris, is we just needed to sort through and find out what perspective we were coming from. And I'm glad that we did. And like I say, I really appreciate having Chris on here. And I thank all you folks that joined the stream. I see, thanks, Bennett and Chris. Thank you very much, Liquid Gal. Really appreciate. What's that? From democracy to demonocracy? Right on. Yeah. Majority of politicians own second and third properties, then they rent out. Oh yeah, so these are quite old comments. They must be there. Anyways, like I say, I really appreciate all you folks that joined the live stream. I'm going to be doing another one. Where is that? Oh, on Tuesday. Yeah, I'm going to be doing another live stream Tuesday. Actually, it's going to be pertaining to that grok interaction I had with the artificial intelligence of X. Because I wish Canadians, and well, not just Canadians, but I wish a whole lot more human beings were as easy to train in terms of understanding and actually grasping and accepting the philosophy of liberty as Grok, the artificial intelligent arm of X, the platform X. Because I prompted it. I had a engaging conversation with artificial intelligence, mind you. And it took a little, nuance. I had to really come at it from a couple different angles and using universal ethics as the basis and principles as the basis for my Socratic dialogue. But it worked out, and actually, Grok actually ended up accepting that yes, the philosophy of liberty is legit, and government not so much. But like I say, at least that particular form of AI is figured out. Maybe Gemini could get at least even remotely as close to that. But something has seriously gone awry with that particular one. Maybe I should have an engaging interaction with that one too, right? After all, I am here to educate and inform. Anyways, like I say, I thank you folks for joining the live stream, and thank Chris once again for joining me. And I look forward to not just the next live stream, but all the other future ones that I got coming up. And there are a few of them coming up. I won't do any teasers just yet, because just like with Gray Matter podcast, he kind of got taken away that day, couldn't make the appointment. So we're just going to reschedule that. But there's a couple other ones that should be lively interactions, I would say. And like I say, I'll kind of hold off tacitly till I actually have everything written in stone and make sure that those are actually going to happen at the time they're going to happen before I start to do the announcements. But thanks to you folks. Libertarians, now let me just read this real. Libertarians never seem capable of thinking 3 steps ahead. Unheard or what the heck kind of a username? Never seemed capable of thinking 3 steps ahead. So 2's not enough, I guess. Well, that just gives us something that we want to strive or attain even more. I'll take that as a challenge on Hef. Hold my beer. Actually, no, I don't drink, but yeah, trying to be 3 steps ahead. Yeah, if that's what it takes. Hey, like I say, I'm always striving to achieve or attain anything better than I might have done in the past. All right, you folks, I know I've been going on long enough today. Have a good one. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.